Good evening. If you can hear me, then I suppose you're still awake. Maybe you couldn't sleep. Maybe something kept you up. Or maybe you've been driving for hours, chasing the faint line of the horizon, trying to remember where the night began. Either way, you found your way here, to this small frequency between stations, the kind of place that isn't listed anywhere, that doesn't ask for your name. The lights are dim. The air hums with the sound of static and the slow turning of the world. Outside, the streets are empty. The windows are dark, and even the wind seems to hold its breath. You're safe here, for now. You see, the night has its own stories. Quiet ones, patient ones, the kind that wait for someone to listen. They don't shout, they whisper. They linger at the edge of hearing, just beyond the sound of your own heartbeat. They are the stories people leave behind in warehouses and empty flats, on deserted roads, and in towns that never made it to the map. Some are true. Some only feel true. But the difference doesn't matter. Not after midnight. Because at this hour, truth and imagination share the same skin. If you're listening in the dark, do yourself a favor, don't turn on the lights. Let your eyes adjust. Let the room fade into shadow. The night always sounds better when you can't quite see what's around you. Now, take a breath. Listen to the hum in your ears, that faint hiss you thought was silence. That's where our stories live. Tonight, we have a few of them. 5 tales, each pulled from somewhere that shouldn't exist. They're quiet things, lonely things, and if you listen closely enough, you might just hear your own reflection calling back. Don't worry about the time. You've got hours ahead of you. Hours to drift, to dream, to remember. Just keep your hands still. Keep your eyes forward. And whatever you do, if you hear your name on the line, don't answer. Welcome to the After Midnight Hour. This first story is called The Proxy Skin. The thing about old warehouses is the silence. It isn't the clean kind, not the sort you find in a library or an empty field. It's thick. You can hear it settling on the walls, mixed with the hum of dead bulbs and the faint sigh of air ducts breathing in their sleep. I'd been working night shifts there for almost 3 years. A distribution hub for things nobody wanted anymore. Old furniture, expired stock, boxes with faded labels that had lost their way between companies. It smelled of dust and glue and something faintly sweet, like old paper soaked in rain. That night, the light above my desk flickered. It always did around 1 in the morning. I'd stopped reporting it. The electrician said the ballast was fine, but I knew it wasn't the ballast. The light had a rhythm. It blinked like a slow pulse, as though something alive was breathing behind the glass. I remember looking at my hands, dry, cracked, thin from the cold, and thinking how strange it was that I barely recognized them anymore. You spend enough time in a place that never changes, and you start to fade into it. That was when I found the wallet. It came from a box that had been misplaced. Unallocated miscellaneous, batch 4. The label had peeled halfway off, and the tape had yellowed to the color of old tea. Inside were things you'd expect to find at a flea market. A photograph of a dog with half its face cut off, a pocket knife without a blade, a broken lighter, and that wallet. It wasn't anything special, cracked brown leather, dry as bark, but it felt warm. Not from my hands. It was the kind of warmth you feel when you pick up something that's been sitting in sunlight. I thought maybe it had been near one of the vents, but there wasn't a vent near that shelf. Inside the wallet was a folded piece of paper, soft from age. On it were 3 rules typed in fading ink. Warm the proxy skin with water. Apply to the palm. Do not remove once connected. No signature, no explanation. Beneath the paper was a small roll of something thin, almost translucent, tied with a piece of black thread. For a second, I thought it was parchment, but the texture, it wasn't paper. It had the faint pattern of pores. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because the nights were too long, and the silence needed to be broken. I took a cup from the break room, filled it with warm water, and set it beside me. I unrolled the little strip and touched it with the tip of my finger. It was softer than I expected. It reminded me of touching the inside of my own wrist. There was a faint smell, too, something between copper and salt. I dipped it into the water. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the edges of the strip began to curl, almost as if it were breathing in. The surface turned supple, alive somehow, and I swear I saw it twitch. My hand hesitated above it. I remember thinking, it's just leather, old leather, maybe human once, maybe animal, doesn't matter. I pressed it gently into my palm. It clung like damp paper. The warmth spread immediately. A pulse that traveled from my hand up my arm, steady, rhythmic. I could feel my heartbeat answering it, like two metronomes finding the same pace. And then, for a brief second, the light above me stopped flickering. The hum of the warehouse went still. Every sound, the fans, the ticking of the clock, even my own breath paused, as though the whole room were holding itself in. A faint image bloomed at the edge of my vision, not quite a picture, more like the shadow of one. I thought I saw a wall, not mine, a different one, closer, darker. I blinked, but the image didn't fade. It was like remembering something you'd never lived. I could hear something too, faint and soft. A scraping sound, distant but sharp enough to make my teeth ache. It came in steady strokes, like metal against plaster. My palm burned. The strip of skin pulsed once, as if it had a heartbeat of its own, and then the light above me flickered again fast, frantic before bursting into steady brightness. The noise returned. Fans, ticking, hum, the faraway rattle of pipes. Everything was back, except for one thing. The strip wasn't in my hand anymore. It had vanished. But when I turned my palm over, I could see the faint outline of it beneath my own skin. A thin, pale pattern that hadn't been there before. It wasn't gone. It had sunk in, and when I closed my eyes, I could still hear the scraping just under the surface, behind my thoughts, as though someone, somewhere, was working very hard to get out. The first thing I noticed the next morning was the noise. It wasn't loud, more like a residue of sound that hung in the air after you woke up. A scraping, distant and patient, as if someone were sharpening a knife a few rooms away. Except, I lived alone. When I looked down, my palm still carried that faint silvery mark beneath the skin. It wasn't sore, but it tingled, like an old scar remembering something. I ran my thumb over it. The pattern shifted under the light, faintly reflective, like oil on water. At work, the warehouse felt different. The air was colder, though the heating hadn't changed. The radio that usually muttered in the background was dead static, and the flickering light above my desk glowed a little warmer than usual, as though it knew something I didn't. I tried to focus on the inventory list. Numbers, boxes, barcodes. Simple, harmless things. But the scraping sound came back, this time clearer inside my head, yet not mine. It had rhythm, intent. When I pressed my hand to my temple, I saw something. Not a vision, not exactly, more like the shape of a memory belonging to someone else. A wall, cracked plaster, gray and uneven. The light came from somewhere low, not a bulb, not a flame. Something dull and constant. The sound of air moving through a narrow vent. And beneath it, a figure. I didn't see him, not directly, but I felt his presence the way you feel another person in a dark room. The weight of someone breathing nearby. He was scraping the wall with something sharp. Slow strokes, left to right. I could almost smell the dust dry, chalky, metallic. When I blinked, the warehouse snapped back around me. The light flickered again. The smell was gone. I told myself it was stress. Too many long nights. Maybe I'd fallen asleep on my feet. But when I looked at my hand, the mark shimmered faintly like it was wet beneath the skin. At lunch, I sat in the break room, staring at my reflection in the vending machine's black glass. Behind me, through the glass, the corridor seemed longer than usual. The exit light at the far end looked distant, as though the walls had stretched. I blinked, and it was back to normal. When I turned my hand palm up again, I could feel heat radiating from that mark, a pulse that wasn't quite mine. So I did the only thing that felt reasonable at the time. I leaned into it. I let my eyes half close. I listened to the rhythm of the pulse, and the world shifted. No sound, no sense of weight, just the faint hum of something alive, far away, The wall came back closer now. This time, I could see the shape of a door embedded within it. Not a door meant to open, but something sealed over, painted, plastered, forgotten. And in front of it, that same figure. He was kneeling, his back toward me. His hands were raw, red at the knuckles. Each movement peeled a line of plaster away. Beneath it, the color wasn't gray. It was flesh. Pale, mottled, almost luminous in the half-light. He paused, tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something. I didn't breathe. His left hand moved, slow and deliberate, across the wall. He pressed it flat against the surface, and I realized with a kind of sinking nausea that it was my hand. The same veins, the same small scar near the wrist from where I had cut myself opening a crate years ago. And then, softly, as though speaking through layers of cotton, a voice said, "You're looking through the wrong side." My body jerked. The vision shattered. I was back in the warehouse, the hum of the lights heavy in my ears. But my palm was burning now. Not a sharp pain, more like pressure, as if something beneath the skin was pushing up, testing the surface. When I rubbed it, the flesh felt thinner there, pliable. I went to the restroom and turned on the tap. The water came out warm, steaming faintly. I held my hand beneath it, hoping to cool it. But the moment the heat touched the mark, the world tilted again. I saw a ceiling, low, damp, stained with watermarks. A single bulb swung on a wire, barely alive, and beneath it, a sound breathing, not mine. Slow, labored, wet. Then came another noise. A scrape, not metal this time. Fingernails. I forced my eyes open. The restroom mirror looked back, distorted by condensation. My reflection seemed half a second behind me. For the first time, I felt it. The connection. Not just seeing, not imagining, but sharing a pulse with something that was alive elsewhere. When I moved my hand, I could feel resistance, as if someone on the other end moved in reverse. I whispered, "Who are you?" No answer, just that same breath. Closer now. I shut off the tap and stumbled back. The light above me flickered twice, then steadied, humming like a heartbeat. For the rest of the shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that the warehouse had eyes. Every reflective surface, a window, a piece of polished steel seemed to carry a depth it hadn't before, a kind of waiting. And when I clocked out, I noticed something else. The security camera in the corner, the one that never worked, was glowing faintly red. Later that night, I woke to the sound of scratching. Not outside, not from the walls. From under my pillow. When I lifted it, the sound stopped. There was nothing there, just the faint imprint of a hand pressed into the sheet, still warm. I turned my palm over. The mark glowed dimly beneath the skin, pulsing slow, patient. And for a moment, one brief, terrifying moment, I felt another pulse answer it, perfectly in time. Not Mina. There are certain nights that never quite end. They just stretch, quietly, until the next one begins. I stopped keeping track of the days after the third night of hearing the scraping beneath my dreams. It came and went like a low tide, sometimes fading to nothing, sometimes rising until it pressed against the back of my skull, a steady drag of sound that made every breath feel borrowed. I told myself it was the building, the old pipes, the air ducts, maybe a loose panel shifting with the heat. But each time I placed my hand on the wall, I could feel it respond, like the rhythm of someone breathing on the other side. By then, the mark on my palm had changed. It was no longer faint or silvery, but darkened slightly, the color of bruised skin. Under certain light, I could see something moving beneath it, a thread of pulse, faintly red, faintly alive. I covered it with a glove at work, though I didn't know why. Nobody ever came by the night shift except the occasional driver or security check, and even then, they barely looked at me. Still, I didn't want anyone to see. I suppose I already felt that the thing under my skin was private, something that didn't belong in daylight. On the fourth night, the connection deepened. I was sitting at my desk with the inventory sheets spread before me when I noticed the edges of the paper trembling slightly, as though disturbed by a breath. The warehouse was utterly still. Not even the fans were running. I leaned closer, and a whisper brushed through the air, soft enough that I wasn't sure I'd heard it at all. It said, "Do you see it yet?" The voice didn't come from the room. It came from inside, the sound buried within the faint hum of the lights, threaded through the electricity. It was neither male nor female, neither close nor far. It simply was. When I looked up, I found myself staring at the reflection in the metal surface of the clock hanging on the wall. The hands had stopped moving, frozen at the same time they had the night before, a little after 1:30. In the reflection, the room appeared the same, but slightly dimmer, like a photograph left too long in the Sunday. And behind me, in that mirrored world, there was movement. A figure stood just beyond the reach of light, facing away. The outline was human, but elongated somehow. The shoulders hunched, the arms hanging too long. It wasn't doing anything. It was simply there, waiting. I turned slowly, expecting to see someone behind me, but of course there was nothing. Just the shelves, the boxes, the low mechanical murmur of emptiness. When I looked back at the reflection, the figure was closer. I don't remember deciding to speak, but the words came out, quiet and uncertain. "Who are you?" The reflection seemed to breathe. The voice returned, faint and measured. "You can hear me now." My throat went dry. I felt the mark on my palm tighten, as though the skin itself had turned inward. "What is this?" I asked. "What are you?" A pause. Then, softly, "A window and a debt." The words felt too deliberate, too heavy to be random. I stood up, knocking the chair back, but the sound was muffled, swallowed by the air before it reached my ears. Everything had a thickness to it, as if the warehouse had filled with invisible smoke. The light seemed to flatten, and the reflection in the clock no longer matched my movements. The me in the glass was a half-second behind, and his eyes, my eyes, were darker, unfocused, like they were looking at something just beyond me. The voice continued, though now it seemed to echo from within my chest rather than around me. "You shouldn't have peeled it. The proxy needs a keeper." I didn't peel anything," I said, my voice too loud, bouncing strangely off the walls. "You warmed it," the voice whispered. "You woke it." Something in those words made my stomach twist. I pressed my hand against the cold metal surface of the desk, trying to steady myself, but the metal wasn't cold. It was warm, the same unnatural warmth that had come from the wallet that first night. Beneath the surface, I felt a faint tremor, like a breath drawn through unseen lungs. I pulled my hand back, and when I did, the mark on my palm was glowing faintly, a dull, restless red. That was when I heard the sound of the scraping again, not distant this time, but close, immediate, as if someone were dragging their nails across the inside of the desk itself. The metal vibrated softly. I backed away, knocking into a stack of boxes. Something inside one of them shifted, a dull thud, as though a small weight had just been dropped. I froze. The scraping stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, from the direction of the boxes, came the voice again, softer now, almost gentle. "Do you see it yet?" I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out of that place and never come back, but something about the stillness held me there. It wasn't fear. Not exactly, more like the way you can't look away from the surface of deep water, knowing it might show you something if you wait long enough. I reached out with my left hand and pulled the top box toward me. The tape split easily, and the flaps fell open. Inside was a mirror, small, rectangular, its surface clouded with dust. The kind of mirror you might find in a hotel that doesn't exist anymore. It shouldn't have been there. I had checked that shipment a week ago, and there hadn't been anything like it. Yet now it sat in the box, tilted slightly upward, reflecting the dim amber light of the ceiling bulb. I crouched down, my breath slow, and brushed the dust away with the back of my sleeve. The surface was scratched, but clear enough to see my face. Only, it wasn't quite my face. The expression was wrong too, still, too blank. And the eyes, though open, didn't blink when I did. They stared straight through me. And behind them, in the depth of that glass, The same cracked plaster wall appeared once more. The figure was there again, crouched, its back raw and peeling, the sound of nails against plaster steady and desperate. This time, I could see his hand clearly, the same as mine, down to the faint scar. The wall in front of him had been scraped nearly clean, revealing something smooth and wet beneath. It looked like skin. My stomach turned. The figure pressed his palm flat against it, and I felt a surge of heat through my own hand, sharp and immediate. The mark throbbed, and I felt pressure pushing outward, as though something behind it was trying to align with me. The voice spoke again, not through the air, but directly behind my eyes. "You're holding the wrong reflection." I stumbled backward, the mirror slipping from my hands and hitting the floor. It didn't shatter. It simply lay there, humming faintly, as though something inside the glass was still moving. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Too fast, too heavy. I turned to leave, but the door to the corridor was closed, though I hadn't closed it. My glove, which I'd dropped earlier, lay beside it, turned inside out. I looked down at my hand again. The mark had spread, creeping up toward the wrist in thin, branching lines. The skin there looked thinner, almost translucent, and beneath it, I thought I saw movement. Faint ripples, like something alive swimming under the surface. That night, I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car outside the warehouse, the rain streaking the windscreen, the wipers ticking back and forth without rhythm. The radio was on, though no station came through, just static, soft and constant. Every few seconds there was a break in the noise, a whisper threaded through the interference, never quite forming words but always close enough to sound familiar. When I finally drove home, the city felt quieter than usual. The streets were empty, the lamps dim, as though the world itself had been turned down a notch. In the reflection of the shop windows, I could see myself moving, but sometimes the reflection lagged, half a beat behind, as if it were waiting to see what I would do next. I tried not to look. At home, I locked the door, turned off the lights, and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone buzzed once, though there were no messages. When I picked it up, the screen flickered, and for a moment showed something strange, a contact that didn't exist. Proxy. Then it vanished. I set the phone down and pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. That was when I heard the voice again, faint but close, as though someone were leaning over my shoulder. "You're starting to see it." I opened my eyes. The room was dark, but not empty. In the window's reflection, a dim shape hovered behind me, pale, motionless. Its head tilted slightly, as if curious. I turned sharply, but there was nothing there, just the curtain shifting slightly from the draft. Yet the reflection remained. My reflection was no longer alone. The faint outline of another figure stood just behind my shoulder, its face obscured by a shimmer of movement, like heat rising off metal. The voice whispered, "You're on this side now." I moved closer to the window, heart pounding. The figure mirrored me, but not perfectly. When I lifted my hand, it was half a second late, and when I stopped, it continued for a moment longer. I watched in disbelief as it raised its own hand to the glass and pressed its palm against it. Slowly, as though guided by instinct, I lifted my marked hand and placed it against the same spot. The surface of the glass wasn't cold. It was soft, pliant, almost warm. I could feel a pulse against my skin, not quite mine, and for a heartbeat, the distance between reflection and body disappeared. My eyes blurred, and I saw the cracked wall again, closer this time, so close I could almost touch it. The figure on the other side turned its head slightly, and though I couldn't see its face, I knew somehow that it was looking directly at me. I don't know how long I stood there. When I finally pulled my hand away, the window fogged with condensation, though the air in the room was still. My palm ached. In the center of the mark, a tiny blister had formed, a raised bump like the start of a new fingerprint. I touched it gently and felt a pulse. Not fast, not slow, just steady. I sat back down, staring at my hand in the dim light until dawn began to bleed through the curtains. The color of the world outside looked wrong, pale, washed out, as though the sun hadn't fully committed to rising. The air carried that same stillness the warehouse had at night, a silence that seemed to listen. When I finally looked at the window again, my reflection smiled. Only I hadn't. And somewhere, faint but certain, I heard the scraping start again, a slow, deliberate sound, coming from the other side of the glass, where my reflection's lips began to move in perfect time with the voice that now echoed softly in my head. You're not looking through anymore. You're being seen. Sleep became something I could only remember having done. Each time I closed my eyes, I'd drift just far enough to lose my sense of the room. Then the noise would return, not the scraping this time, but a low murmur, as though someone were talking from behind a door with their mouth pressed to the wood. The words were never clear, just a texture of breath, but the cadence was unmistakably human. It sounded like a confession told too close to the ear, the kind of whisper that feels like it stains more than it informs. By the fifth morning, the mark on my palm had deepened. The skin there was no longer smooth. It had begun to rise in small, uneven ridges, forming a pattern like the faint lines of a fingerprint. Except the lines didn't follow the natural whirls of my own hand. They spiraled inward, converging toward the center, where the skin was thin enough to show movement beneath. I'd catch the shift of it sometimes, like the twitch of a muscle under glass, a ripple that traveled with the rhythm of something alive. When I pressed it, there was a delay before the pressure pushed back, as though the response had to travel from far away. I told myself it was an infection or a hallucination from lack of sleep. I considered going to the hospital, but the thought of explaining it to anyone filled me with an absurd, almost superstitious dread. I could picture the sterile light, the smell of disinfectant, the inevitable moment when the nurse would ask me to remove the bandage and I'd uncover something that didn't belong to either of us. I imagined their face, the widening of their eyes, the quiet backward step. And then what? What if they couldn't unsee it? What if I couldn't close it back up? So I didn't go. Instead, I wrapped my hand in a cloth and went back to the warehouse. It was easier to face something familiar, even if that familiarity had started to rot around the edges. The morning light through the high windows looked brittle, pale, filtered through a film of dust that hung permanently in the air. The building had begun to feel less like a place and more like a body, the way the beams creaked like bones settling, the hum of the vents that rose and fell like shallow breathing. I caught myself walking more quietly, as though afraid of waking it. The clock on the wall had stopped again. The hand stuck at the same point. I tried winding it once, but the mechanism wouldn't catch. Instead of ticking, it made a faint grinding sound, like teeth moving against each other. I left it alone. The mirror I'd found in the box was gone. I hadn't taken it home, but it wasn't in the pile of discarded objects either. I thought about it more often than I wanted to admit. I could still feel the warmth of its glass, that strange pliancy, as if what it showed me wasn't reflection but proximity. When I looked at the metal surface of the shelves now, I no longer saw my reflection as whole. The edges of my face wavered, like I was being seen through moving water, and sometimes the movement didn't match the way I turned my head. That evening, around midnight, the lights dimmed again. It happened slowly this time, like dusk entering from the corners. The hum of the electrical line stretched into a single, continuous tone. My breath came back to me through the sound, echoing in a rhythm that wasn't quite my own. I stood at my desk, watching the air itself bend slightly, as though the space were adjusting to make room for something unseen. Then, on the far wall, I noticed a shape. It wasn't cast by any object I could see. A tall, narrow silhouette that seemed to tremble at the edges, breathing in the rhythm of the lights. I wanted to move, but the weight of stillness held me. The shape tilted its head, and though it had no features, I knew the gesture. It was mine. I raised my right hand, slowly, as if to test the trick of the light. The shadow followed, but a fraction too early it moved first, its gesture already complete by the time mine began. The sight made my stomach twist. The light buzzed once, and the shape leaned forward, the surface of the wall rippling faintly, as though made of liquid. The voice returned, quiet and measured, but no longer inside my head. It came from the mark itself, a vibration beneath my skin that shaped the air into words. You see how easily time forgets which side it began on? My throat felt dry, my tongue thick. What are you doing to me? Nothing, it said. You're doing it to yourself. The skin is only an instrument. You are playing both sides. The shadow stepped closer. The air chilled, though my body felt fevered. When it moved again, I realized that I was following it now, my hand rising half a heartbeat late. The rhythm reversed. It raised its palm toward me, and I mirrored it, helplessly, the way you mirror someone's yawn without meaning to. Our hands aligned across the surface of the wall. For a moment, I thought I felt the cool touch of plaster. Then warmth spread outward, soft and heavy, and the wall gave beneath my fingers like flesh. I pulled back instinctively, stumbling over a crate, but the warmth remained in my palm, seeping up my arm like ink through fabric. My breathing grew shallow. The world tilted slightly, the edges of things dimming, colors flattening to a dull bronze. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed, though the sound came from inside my head. I don't know how long I stood there. When the light steadied again, the shadow was gone. Only the faint outline of a handprint remained on the wall. Not mine. Slightly longer, the fingers thinner. The texture of it glistened faintly, as if wet, though when I touched it, my fingers came away dry. I drove home with the windows open, letting the night air scrape at my face, desperate for something real. The streets were empty, the world wrapped in that particular stillness that only comes in the hours before dawn, when even the wind seems tired. My reflection in the rearview mirror blinked slower than I did. Once or twice, it didn't blink at all. At home, I poured water into a bowl and placed my hand over it. The skin there looked translucent now, almost luminous in the low light, the ridges forming a pattern that pulsed gently. I leaned close, breathing shallowly. The water trembled in time with my heartbeat. I dipped my fingers in, half expecting pain, but instead there was relief, a warmth that spread upward, loosening the muscles in my wrist, the ache in my shoulder. Then the water shifted. Tiny ripples appeared, though my hand had gone still. The surface darkened, and a faint image bloomed there. Not my reflection, but the same cracked wall, lit from below by that weak, yellowish glow. The figure was closer now. He was standing, his movements more certain. The wall he'd been scraping was gone, replaced by a door, perfectly smooth, as though it had always been there. He turned his head, slowly, and though I couldn't see his face, I felt his gaze on me, sharp and undeniable. I whispered, "What do you want?" The answer came not as sound, but as sensation. A tightening in my chest, a pulse of heat from the mark, and a single word that wasn't spoken but known. Return. The image rippled once, and the water cleared. My hand was still submerged, though I couldn't feel the temperature anymore. When I lifted it, the water clung to my skin longer than it should have, as if reluctant to let go. The ridges on my palm had changed again. The pattern no longer spiraled inward, but outward, branching like veins, reaching toward the wrist. That night, I dreamt of mirrors, rooms lined with them, endless corridors of glass, each one showing a version of me slightly out of step. Some smiled when I didn't. Others stared blankly, their mouths moving in silent rhythm. In the center of it all was a single mirror that reflected nothing, its surface as dark as oil. I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth, and the faint impression that something had been whispering just before I opened my eyes. The next morning, the mark had climbed past my wrist. I could see faint traces of it beneath the sleeve of my shirt, like a bruise spreading too evenly to be natural. The skin felt tighter there, as if something beneath it was drawing inward, gathering itself. I tried to ignore it, to go about the routine shower, coffee, jacket, but every reflection caught my attention. The kettle, the window, the glass of the picture frame by the door. In each one, my movements lagged a fraction, like the reflection was thinking before it decided to follow. By the time I reached the warehouse, the sun had vanished behind low clouds. The light outside was a dull gray that made everything look submerged. Inside, the air felt heavier than usual, the silence dense enough to feel against my skin. When I passed the wall where the handprint had been, I saw that it had darkened. The outline was sharper, and the fingers were pressed deeper into the surface. I went to the sink in the break room and turned on the tap. The water came out slow, thick with air bubbles that shimmered as they rose. I held my marked hand beneath it, but before the water touched the skin, it bent away, splitting as if repelled. A thin hiss filled the air, not quite sound, more like pressure escaping from a sealed space. The lights flickered once, twice, and the reflection in the stainless steel basin tilted its head, independently of mine. "You're almost there," the voice said. I didn't respond. My throat refused to form words. "You're learning what the proxy remembers," it continued. "The first keeper never leaves. They just change their shape." My chest tightened. "I'm not," I began, but the rest dissolved into a cough. My voice sounded distant, muffled, like it was coming from behind glass. The reflection smiled, thin and deliberate. "It's not about keeping. It's about balance. One holds, one sees. You're just the next shape of the same silence." The hum of the building deepened, a low resonance that shook the shelves. I backed away from the sink, clutching my wrist. The heat beneath the skin was almost unbearable now, pulsing faster than my heart. I stumbled toward the door, fumbling for the keys, but when I reached the handle, the metal was warm. Too warm. I pulled back instinctively, and a faint layer of skin came away on the surface, curling like ash. Beneath it, the flesh was smooth, pale, unlined, new. I stood there, staring at my hand, breathing hard. The voice was quieter now, almost tender. "You see, it's already begun. The proxy doesn't take. It trades." The lights flickered once more, and for an instant, the room was filled with motion. Shadows moved along the walls, overlapping, folding into each other, all shaped vaguely like me, but not quite, some taller, some narrower, all faceless. They reached out in unison, hands extended, palms glowing faintly like the mark on mine. The hum built into a low, resonant tone that vibrated in my teeth. When the light steadied again, the room was empty. My breath came in sharp bursts. I looked down. The mark on my hand had stopped pulsing. It was perfectly still now, the lines smooth and settled, as though it had always been part of me. I pressed my palm flat against the nearest metal surface, needing proof of reality. The reflection did not move, and for the first time, I wasn't sure which of us was waiting for the other to follow. I stopped wearing gloves after that night. There was no point in hiding what was already changing. The mark had traveled past my elbow, spreading in thin, branching filaments that glowed faintly beneath the skin, as though the veins themselves had begun to remember a different pattern. It didn't hurt anymore. The pain had been replaced by something else, a deep, rhythmic awareness, like a heartbeat that no longer belonged to one body but two. When I breathed, I could feel the echo of another breath behind it, sometimes quicker, sometimes slower, sometimes not mine at all. The warehouse had started to change with me. The walls had taken on a faint, skin-like sheen in certain lights, and the air carried a low, ceaseless hum, the kind that sits just below hearing, too constant to notice until you try to listen for silence. Every surface reflected not what was in front of it, but what was behind. The clock never moved now. It only hummed softly, keeping time with something that had no hours. I began hearing footsteps that never arrived. A soft, dragging sound along the corridor, stopping just outside the office door, waiting. I used to turn the handle and check, but after a while I stopped. Whatever it was didn't want to come in. It wanted me to open the door myself. When I tried to sleep, the dreams returned the room, the cracked plaster, the faint sound of scraping, but the perspective had shifted. I wasn't watching anymore. I was the one kneeling in the dim light, my nails broken, my fingers raw, tracing the outlines of a door that had no handle. The air smelled of damp and something sweet, almost metallic. When I woke, there was dust beneath my fingernails and the taste of copper in my mouth. I told myself I was losing track of time, that exhaustion was bending things. But deep down, I knew time had nothing to do with it. I had started to occupy more than one place at once. A man stretched thin across the skin of another. That morning the wallet returned. It sat on my desk where the mirror used to be, the leather darker, slicker, as if oiled. I hadn't brought it back. No one else could have. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for the world to explain itself. But it didn't. When I finally opened it, the same folded note was there, soft, fragile, damp at the corners. The rules were still typed in that faint, uneven ink. Warm the proxy skin with water. Apply to the palm. Do not remove once connected. Beneath the paper lay the strip of skin again, perfectly rolled. The thread replaced, tighter this time, like a gift returned. I turned the paper over. For the first time, I noticed faint indentations on the back, as if someone had pressed hard when typing. There was a fourth line, invisible unless you tilted it toward the light, the imprint of letters without ink, carved shallow into the paper. 4. If removed, the proxy will be replaced. I stared at it until the words blurred, and for the first time since this began, I felt something close to clarity, not understanding, but inevitability. The rule wasn't a warning. It was a schedule. Everything that had happened was a preparation for that single act of removal. I didn't go home that night. The city had begun to feel unreal, the streets repeating, the same cars parked in the same places no matter how far I drove. I circled back to the warehouse before dawn, unlocked the door, and stepped into the thick quiet that had become familiar. The air was warm, damp almost. The lights didn't flicker anymore. They glowed a soft amber, steady as breath. On the far wall, where the shadow had once stood, there was now a faint outline of a doorway, drawn in pale veins that pulsed softly beneath the plaster. I knew without thinking that it led to the same room I'd seen in my mind, the room behind the eyes. I took a deep breath and peeled back my sleeve. The skin along my arm was changing color, not decaying but transforming thin layers, shedding to reveal something smoother, cleaner, almost reflective. It shimmered faintly under the light, as though remembering what light was meant to feel like. I reached for a knife from the workbench. The handle was cold, the blade dull, but it was enough. I held it above the mark on my palm, pressing until the edge just broke the surface. No blood came. The skin opened cleanly, like paper splitting along an old fold. Beneath it was not flesh, not exactly something softer, translucent, alive, but not in pain. The hum of the building deepened, vibrating through the floor and up through my bones. The air thickened, heavy with warmth. I pressed the knife deeper, trying to pry the strip free, but my hand resisted, gripping itself, tendons tightening against the motion. The blade slipped, and the cut widened on its own, peeling back in slow, deliberate motion. The pattern beneath began to glow, the veins aligning into perfect symmetry. The voice returned, not from outside, not from within, but from the space between thoughts, the silence words fall through before they form. You can't remove what you are. I froze. The room tilted. The knife fell from my fingers, clattering once before vanishing into the hum. My arm felt weightless. The glow climbed toward my shoulder, pulsing faster now, the rhythm no longer matching my heartbeat. I pressed my hand against the wall for balance, but the surface yielded. It wasn't plaster anymore. It was warm, pliant, the texture unmistakable. Skin, a faint impression of a palm pushed outward from the other side, meeting mine perfectly. For a moment, we held each other through the thin layer of whatever separated us. Then the pressure increased. The wall flexed, breathing. I tried to pull away, but my hand stayed. The skin beneath my palm fused to the surface, threads of light connecting, nodding, sealing. I shouted, though the sound didn't travel. It stayed inside my mouth, echoing back into my head. The hum became a low roar, filled with 1,000 breaths, exhaled at once. I could see shapes moving beneath the wall, outlines of hands, faces, shifting, searching. And then silence. The air cooled instantly. The light dimmed. The hum flattened into a single tone before vanishing altogether. My hand came free. The mark was gone. My skin was smooth, unblemished, almost new. For a moment, I thought it was over. I could breathe again. The walls were still, the air thin but clean. The clock on the wall began to tick once more, its hands moving, marking time again as if waking from sleep. I laughed, though the sound felt strange in my mouth, unfamiliar, like using someone else's voice. I looked around the room. Everything was the same. The desk, the shelves, the faint smell of dust and oil. But something was missing. The photograph pinned to the wall above my desk, the one I'd always used as a kind of anchor, was gone. In its place was a faint rectangle of cleaner paint, the ghost of where it had been, and the wallet. It sat on the desk again, open this time, the inside empty. When I turned to leave, the door was slightly ajar. It had never done that before. I stepped toward it, one hand on the frame, and felt the texture of the wood under my fingers dry, splintered but real. Beyond it, the corridor was dark, the same hum returning faintly from somewhere deep below the floor. I looked down at my hand. The skin was smooth, pale, but under the light, I saw something glimmer just beneath the surface. Not the old mark, but a new pattern. Faint, incomplete, still forming. A movement caught my eye, the clock's reflection in the glass door. For the first time, the reflection was slightly out of sync. The second hand moved a beat too early. I lifted my hand and waved slowly, and in the reflection, my arm hesitated before following. A voice, my own voice, came from the far end of the corridor. "You shouldn't have taken it off." I turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. Only the sound of breath, not mine, filled the space. I looked back toward the desk. The wallet had closed itself. The light flickered once, long enough for the shadows to rearrange themselves. For a moment, I saw another figure standing where I had been, head tilted, arm lifted, examining its own hand as though testing it for the first time. Then the light steadied. The reflection in the door smiled slow, deliberate, half a second early, and whispered something I couldn't hear. I blinked, and the room was empty again. Only the faint scent of warm water lingered in the air. Story 2. The exit sign. There's a kind of silence that belongs only to the highway. It isn't peaceful. It's hollow, endless. The kind that sits behind the sound of the engine and makes you think too much about what's waiting at the next mile marker. Out here, between Reno and nothing, the world narrows down to 2 lanes of asphalt and a thin white line that hums beneath the wheels. The snow had been falling since sundown, fine and steady, turning the desert into a flat sea of gray. My wipers moved in slow rhythm, squeaking every few passes. The radio had given up hours ago, just static now, pulsing with faint whispers that might have been weather updates or ghosts. I kept it on anyway. Silence makes the road longer. I'd been driving for 17 hours straight, hauling refrigeration parts eastward. No passengers, no music, just the sound of the truck and my own heartbeat, trying to keep time with the wheels. Somewhere past mile marker 223, the wind began to change, not stronger, just colder, like the kind of cold that settles inside the bones instead of outside them. That was when I saw the rest stop. It wasn't marked on any of my route notes, but I wasn't surprised. Nevada has a habit of making places appear where they don't belong, towns that vanish between maps, motels with lights still on but no signs of life, stations that hum long after the power grid's gone dark. This one sat just off the shoulder, a squat concrete block with a green exit sign above the door that blinked once every few seconds, like a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm. I pulled in slow, tires crunching over packed snow. There was one other truck there, older model, paint dull from years of dust. Its cab light was on, glowing faintly through the flurries, but no one sat inside. The engine wasn't running. When I cut my own, the world fell quiet in a way that made the air heavy. The only movement came from that blinking sign, its light spilling over the snow in soft green pulses. I could hear my own breath fogging the glass. I told myself I'd just stretch my legs, maybe grab a drink from the vending machine if there was one still working. But even before I opened the door, something about that light bothered me. It didn't flash the way a normal exit sign should. It lingered, dimmed, then brightened again, too slow, too deliberate, almost like it was breathing. When I stepped out, the cold hit hard. The wind came low and sharp, curling under the truck and carrying the smell of metal and salt. My boots sank into the snow, and for a second the only sound was the creak of the frame settling behind me. The other truck sat silent. I half expected the door to open, for someone to climb out, wave, ask if I was heading east or west. Nothing moved. The building looked smaller up close. The door was metal, paint peeling, a strip of frost creeping up its edges. The green light flickered again, washing everything in that sickly glow. I pushed the door open, and a gust of warm air met me, heavy with the scent of dust and old disinfectant. Inside, the lighting was worse, a single bulb flickering above the sinks, humming with fatigue. The tiled floor reflected the green exit sign from the far wall, making the whole place feel underwater. There were 2 stalls, both doors open. A vending machine stood in the corner. Dark screen, the faint outline of a dollar bill still trapped behind its glass. I moved toward the mirror without thinking. Habit, I suppose you look at yourself to prove you're still there. The reflection was fine at first. Just a tired man, unshaven, eyes too red for the hour. But then something shifted. The mirror wasn't showing the room anymore. It showed a corridor. Long, narrow, lined with walls, the same dull white as the tiles, stretching far past what the building could contain. The exit sign reflected behind me was gone. In its place, a faint light at the end of that hallway, greenish but distant, as though buried behind fog. I leaned closer. The reflection didn't change. The corridor waited, empty and perfectly still. I could almost hear the silence coming out of it, a low, steady hum, the kind that presses against your ears until you imagine sound. And then came the footsteps, soft, uneven, echoing from deep within that reflection, heel, toe, drag, heel, toe, drag, slow, deliberate. I stared, frozen, waiting for someone to appear, but the corridor stayed empty. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to stand just behind the glass. I reached out. My fingertips brushed the surface, and for a second, I could swear it wasn't solid. The cold of it felt deep, not surface cold, the kind that comes from a place where air doesn't move anymore. Then, just as sudden, the reflection snapped back. My own face stared at me again, pale, wide-eyed. The light overhead buzzed, the bulb flaring briefly before settling. I blinked hard, breathing fast. Behind me, the exit sign flickered twice in quick succession, then steadied. I laughed once, quietly, the sound too thin. "Just tired," I muttered. The air felt thick enough to swallow the words. When I turned to leave, I noticed something small but wrong, the watch on my wrist. The second hand had stopped moving. The time read 3:41. I tapped the glass. Nothing. I shook my wrist, still frozen. The pulse in my neck quickened, and for a brief, irrational moment, I felt certain that time itself had paused with it. I pushed open the door and stepped back into the snow. The cold bit at my lungs, clean and sharp, washing away the smell of the room. The exit sign glowed behind me, steady now, casting my shadow long across the parking lot. The other truck was still there. Its cab light had gone out. The snow around it was untouched. No tracks leading away, no prints in the powder. I climbed back into my seat, shut the door, and started the engine. The radio crackled once, the static folding into a brief, half-formed voice. A woman's, low and distant, like a forgotten message trapped in the frequency. I turned the dial, but she was gone. As I pulled back onto the highway, the green light from the rest stop blinked once more in my mirrors, distant, fading. I told myself not to look again, but I did. The building was gone, just open desert, snow still falling, the tracks of my wheels already filling in behind me. The watch on my wrist stayed frozen at 3:41, and from somewhere inside the static, a faint voice rose again, almost kind, almost laughing. 41 minutes, that's what it took. I turned the volume down, but the voice didn't fade. It was coming from the engine this time, the low hum of the diesel stretched into a whisper. The road ahead shimmered under the snow, endless and white. I drove on, letting the sound of the tires drown everything else. The line of the horizon never moved. After a while, I couldn't remember if I'd been driving for minutes or hours. The green glow of an exit sign appeared again in the distance, faint through the storm, blinking slowly like a signal from somewhere I'd already been. By the time the sun rose, if it ever really did, the sky had turned the color of steel. It wasn't morning light, not exactly, just a thin smear of gray stretching over the desert. Enough to remind you the world hadn't stopped entirely. The road looked the same in both directions, pale and endless, like it had been drawn once and copied forever. The watch on my wrist still said 3:41. I checked it more times than I could count. Every time, the same thing, the second hand stuck between ticks, the face clouded by a faint condensation that refused to clear. I tried wiping it with my sleeve. The fog came back the moment I looked away. I drove for another 100 miles before I saw the next sign. The highway had flattened out, the snow turning to thin frost that cracked beneath the tires. The radio hissed softly, tuned to nothing, and beneath it I could hear my own breathing, slow, steady, heavier than it should have been. Then, through the blur of frost on the windshield, the green glow appeared again. Another rest stop, same size, same layout, same flickering exit sign over the same metal door, the same 2 tire tracks leading into the lot mine, though I hadn't turned back. I slowed, staring as I passed. The lights inside were on. For a second, I thought I saw movement behind the glass, just a shadow leaning forward, as if to look out. But when I blinked, it was gone. The sign blinked once more, long enough for the green to reflect across the hood of the truck, painting my hands in that sickly color. I pressed the accelerator and didn't look back. Miles later, the voice returned. At first it came from the radio, just a ripple in the static, the kind of thing you mistake for weather interference. Then the pattern emerged, a rhythm, too deliberate to be noise. Words hidden in the hiss. 41 minutes, it said. You left them behind. I switched the radio off. The sound didn't stop. It had moved somewhere else, the low vibration of the steering column, the whisper of the air vents, the hum beneath the tires. The road itself was talking now, every mile repeating the same soft cadence, 41, 41, 41. Somewhere along the line, I realized I hadn't seen another car in hours. Not a single headlight, not even a distant shape on the horizon. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind still dragged loose grains across the asphalt, hissing like sand on glass. I rolled down the window to clear my head, let the cold hit. The air that came in didn't feel right, no sting, no bite, just a hollow chill, the kind that belongs in rooms sealed too long. At mile marker 264, my headlights caught something half buried by frost. Another green sign, half fallen, bent at the base. It didn't mark a town or a rest area, just one word. Faded almost to nothing. Exit. The arrow pointed right, into a stretch of desert that wasn't supposed to be there. No road, no tracks, just open white. For reasons I still don't understand, I slowed down. Maybe because the road behind me looked no different than the one ahead. Maybe because the snow muffled everything except my own thoughts, and even those had started to loop. I turned the wheel slightly, the truck tilting toward the sign, and felt the tires bite into the hard crust of snow. There was a shape in the distance, low, rectangular, caught in the halo of my headlights. The building, the same one. I stopped the engine. The silence that followed was thicker than before, as though the air itself had frozen in place. I could hear the blood moving in my ears. When I opened the door, the world felt smaller, pressed in. My boots hit the snow, but there was no sound. Even the wind had gone. I walked toward the building, each step oddly weightless, the light from the truck stretching long shadows behind me. The door wasn't locked. It opened with the same slow groan as before. The green exit sign pulsed above it, slower now, the glow fading almost to black between breaths. The corridor inside was the same, tiled, narrow, the air heavy with the smell of metal and old moisture, but the mirror above the sink was gone. In its place was a rectangular void, darker than the rest of the wall, a space that seemed to drink the light around it. I stepped closer. My reflection appeared not on glass, but in the faint sheen of the tiles themselves, warped and dim. It didn't match me. Its head tilted slightly to the side, the movement out of sync. Then the light blinked, and the corridor appeared again, not in the mirror this time, but in the real room. The stalls, the sink, everything stretched, the far wall sliding backward until it became the same endless hallway I'd seen before. My breath fogged the air, but the fog didn't fade. It hung in front of me, shimmering faintly, holding its shape like smoke and still air. The footsteps began again. Heel, toe, drag. From the far end of the corridor, the sound moved closer, slow but certain, like someone pacing out the rhythm of their own heartbeat. I tried to call out, to break the silence, but my voice came back smaller than I expected, thin and hollow. Hello? The sound didn't echo. It fell flat, swallowed by the air. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the light and the pulse of my own watch against my wrist, except it wasn't ticking. The voice that spoke next came from behind me. You weren't supposed to stop again. I turned, but there was no one there. The door was open, snow spilling faintly through the crack, already melting on the tile. The light from outside had turned the color of frost. I looked back down the corridor. Something was standing at the far end now, a figure too small to make out, too far to recognize. But I could see the outline of its arm lifting, slowly, as if to wave. 41 minutes, the voice whispered again, closer now, from every direction at once. I stepped backward. The tile under my heel gave slightly, soft like packed sand. The light overhead flickered once, and the figure was gone. Only the hum remained. When I finally turned to leave, the door had closed. I reached for the handle, but my fingers slid off. The metal was wet, slick with condensation. I tried again, harder this time, and the handle twisted but not under my hand. It turned itself. The door opened. On the other side was the desert road, my truck idling exactly where I'd left it. Exhaust drifting upward like smoke. The snow had stopped completely. The air looked thinner, almost too clear. I stepped outside, blinking against the sudden brightness. The green exit sign above me flickered one last time, then went dark. I looked at my watch. Still 3:41. When I climbed back into the cab, the radio was already on. I hadn't touched it. The static was softer now, almost melodic, and beneath it I could hear a voice, that same woman's voice from before, slow and deliberate, whispering through the hum. "You've lost your place," she said. "You left the hour behind." I turned the dial, but the signal didn't change. Every frequency carried her voice now, layered beneath the static. "Drive," she said. "Keep driving. The road remembers where you stopped." I did as she said. I don't know why. The highway stretched ahead, endless and white. The horizon shimmered with the same faint green light, pulsing slow, like a heartbeat beneath the snow. After a while, I realized I wasn't sure which direction I was heading anymore. The mile markers had stopped counting. Every number read the same, 241. And though the clock on the dashboard still glowed faintly, the digits never changed. Even. The truck moved steady, the engine humming low, the sound of the tires merging into the rhythm of the voice still whispering through the vents. "You left the time behind. It will come looking." I watched the road blur into distance, waiting for the next sign, knowing before I saw it that it would be the same green glow, the same door, the same shadow waiting inside. The snow began to fall again, soft and even, covering everything that had already been. The road had stopped changing. It didn't matter how far I drove, the sky stayed the same dull gray. The snow, the same slow drift. The horizon, an unbroken line. The odometer ticked forward, but the scenery didn't care. I passed the same broken fence post 3 times before I understood it wasn't moving. The voice on the radio had gone quiet for a while, fading back into static. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The silence felt too heavy now, the kind that makes you notice your own pulse in the side of your neck. The headlights stretched out into the darkness, cutting through the snow, and every few miles that faint green glow would return the exit sign, flickering on the shoulder like a memory trying to replay itself. I stopped counting how many there were. Somewhere around the 7th or the 10th, maybe it was the same one every time I caught sight of her. At first, it was just a shape in the reflection of the windshield, a blur of movement near the glass, faint enough to blame on fatigue. But when I wiped at it, she didn't vanish. She was standing by the side of the road, a few yards behind the last exit sign, dressed in a long coat that moved strangely, as though the wind knew her better than it knew me. The headlights brushed her face for only a second, pale, lined, calm, not frightening, just aware. Then the light passed, and she was gone. I told myself I was imagining her. The hours were playing tricks, the monotony folding back on itself. But when I checked the mirror, the road behind me was empty except for the faint green reflection that lingered longer than it should have. The next time I saw her, I wasn't driving. The snow had thickened again, visibility down to almost nothing. I pulled over near a service road, planning to rest for an hour. I left the engine running for heat and let my eyes drift closed, the rhythm of the diesel like a slow heartbeat under the floor. I must have dozed off. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, the engine was silent. The dashboard lights had dimmed to nothing. The world outside was dark except for one thing: the faint glow of an exit sign reflecting across the glass of the side mirror. It shouldn't have been there. There was no building, no post, just the light itself hovering in the storm like a fragment of something that refused to die. And in that green light, she was standing again. This time she was closer. Her hair moved in the wind, thin silver strands catching the light. Her hands hung at her sides, bare, fingers curled slightly like she was holding invisible strings. She didn't move toward me, didn't move at all, but her head tilted just enough to suggest she saw me watching. When I turned the ignition, the truck coughed once and caught, headlights flashing back to life. The light vanished. So did she, but the mirror stayed cold. I reached out and touched the glass, half expecting it to fog under my breath. It didn't. The reflection was wrong, too dark, too deep. My own face looked hollow, the eyes sunken, and behind them, faintly, a second pair of eyes blinked. The watch still read 3:41. When I started driving again, I caught her in the rear view more and more often. Always at the edge of the light, always the same stillness, the same coat, the same quiet understanding. It wasn't haunting, not exactly. It was patient. She wasn't following me so much as waiting for me to realize I hadn't moved at all. The highway felt longer each time. The green exit signs began to appear closer together, like stitches closing around the same wound. I started to notice something else too. The hum of the radio returning, but quieter now. A single tone, like the sound of an old fluorescent bulb buzzing in a closed room. Beneath it, faint words surfaced, drawn out as if spoken underwater. Give it back. I turned the dial, but every frequency said the same thing. Different tones, different voices, but always the same phrase, echoing in rhythm with the wipers. Give it back. Give it back. Give it. I slammed the radio off. The voice didn't stop. It had already moved into the sound of the tires, the engine, the wind threading through the cracks in the doorframe. When the next rest stop appeared, I didn't even slow down. The sign blinked green through the snow, illuminating a shadow in the doorway. Small, still, waiting. The same woman. This time she lifted her hand and pointed toward the cab. Not a wave. A command. My skin crawled, but I couldn't look away. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, though somehow I knew what she was saying. 41 minutes. The world narrowed then. The snow, the road, the light, all of it drew inward until it felt like I was driving through the inside of a pulse, the rhythm of the truck syncing perfectly with the beat in my chest. My breath fogged the windshield and didn't fade. When I blinked, she was in the passenger seat. Not sudden, no shock, no sound. She was simply there, as though she'd been there all along, and I'd just remembered to see her. Her eyes were closed, her head tilted slightly against the glass. The coat looked damp, dark in patches. I couldn't tell if it was snow or something else. I didn't speak. Somehow, I knew not to. The radio flickered on by itself, static giving way to a slow, wavering hum. Almost a melody, low and ancient, like an old tune played too slow. Her lips moved with it, whispering the words I'd already heard in every frequency. 41 minutes. My watch ticked once. Just once. The sound was so sharp, it made me flinch. I looked down. The second hand had moved forward one tick, then stopped again. When I looked back at her, her eyes were open. They were the same color as the exit signs. "You shouldn't have stopped," she said, and her voice sounded like it was coming from a long way off, through a tunnel made of glass. "What do you mean?" My voice didn't sound like mine either. She smiled faintly. "Time doesn't like to be broken. You took something that wasn't yours. A minute here, a second there. 40. One of them. Gone somewhere they shouldn't be." I began, but she raised a hand, silencing me. Her fingers were thin, the skin stretched tight, veins faintly green under the surface. "Look at the road," she said. I did. There was no road. Only the white expanse of snow. The faint outline of a line that went nowhere. The headlights reflected off nothing, caught instead on a haze of frozen air that hung motionless ahead of us. The speedometer still read 60. I pressed the brake. The pedal sank without resistance. The truck didn't slow. "Where am I?" I whispered. She turned her gaze toward the windshield, eyes reflecting the pale glow ahead. "You're between what you lost and what remembers losing you." Her words hit something deep, something primal, though I couldn't have said why. The hum of the engine grew softer, fading into a steady pulse. The exit sign appeared ahead again, closer, brighter, the light filling the cab in slow waves. She smiled then, the corners of her mouth barely moving. "You'll have to return them," she said. All 41. The green light pulsed, slower, slower, until it matched the rhythm of my breathing. The world beyond it was black. When I looked back at her, the seat was empty. The hum faded. The snow stopped. The road ahead was gone, replaced by open desert under a washed-out sky. The truck was parked on the shoulder, engine idling. My hand rested on the key, though I couldn't remember turning it. The watch ticked once more, then stopped again at 3:41. In the side mirror, the reflection of the road shimmered faintly, and in it, standing just behind the truck, was the woman, still smiling, still pointing toward the frozen face of my watch. Her lips moved one last time, and though I couldn't hear her, I knew the words. "You'll give them back, one by one." Then she vanished, leaving only the reflection of the exit sign glowing green in the mirror, flickering like a pulse that refused to stop. I tried counting the seconds again. Somewhere between the whisper of the tires and the hum in the steering column, I convinced myself that if I could just keep track, if I could mark the rhythm of my heartbeat against something measurable, time might start again. It didn't. The snow had stopped, but the world didn't brighten. It simply hung in that gray half-light that doesn't belong to any hour. The road stretched forward, unchanged, as if it were being redrawn with every mile I drove. I'd stopped checking the map hours ago. The names and lines had ceased to mean anything. All I had was that frozen watch and the voice that came and went through the static. She hadn't returned to the passenger seat, but I could feel her presence in the quiet, in the way the air shifted when the green exit glow began to bloom again far ahead, small and steady, like a signal beating under the skin of the world. When I reached the next rest stop, I didn't pull in. I slowed. The sign pulsed once, and for the first time, I noticed that it wasn't identical to the others. The glow was dimmer, the lettering almost erased by frost, and beneath the word exit was something new, small print, barely legible, half buried in snow. I rolled the window down and let the cold crawl in. The letters shimmered faintly when the headlights hit them. Minute 1. I stared at it until the light flickered out. After that, they began to appear more often. Every few miles, another sign. Minute 2. Minute 3. Minute 4. Each one a little darker, a little older. The bulbs behind the green casing flickering as if struggling to stay alive. I stopped at the 7th. The building beside it was half collapsed. Its roof caved in under years of snow that never melted. The door hung open, moving slightly though there was no wind. Inside, the corridor waited. I knew it before I stepped in the smell of rust, the sound of water dripping somewhere deep inside the walls, the steady hum that vibrated just beneath hearing. This time, there was no mirror, just a single clock, bolted to the far wall. It read 3:41. I stood there for a long time, watching it. The second hand quivered but never moved. The hum in the air deepened, rising into a tone that pulsed through my bones. I reached up and touched the glass face. It was warm. And then, just for a heartbeat, it ticked forward once. The sound was soft, but it echoed down the corridor, filling the space with a resonance that felt almost alive. A weight lifted from the air, like a held breath finally released. I looked down at my wrist. Sending zu scharfen. The first minute had returned. I drove on. The next sign read minute 2. I didn't stop this time. The glow was brighter, more insistent, and when I passed it, I felt a flicker behind my eyes, a flash of something familiar, a woman's laugh, not the one from the mirror, softer, warmer, a kitchen light, yellow and flickering, the sound of a clock ticking normally. Then it was gone, replaced by the road again, by the hum and the wind and the quiet. Each sign after that brought another fragment. At minute 5, the smell of coffee and rain. At minute 9, the sound of a radio playing a song I knew but couldn't name. At minute 12, the feeling of someone's hand resting on mine. They weren't memories I recognized, but they felt like mine all the same. Every one of them lasted the length of a breath before vanishing into the hum of the truck. My watch moved forward each time. Another second. Another reminder that something was being rebuilt inside the machinery of time. By minute 17, the signs had begun to multiply. Some glowed brighter. Some barely flickered at all. The numbering no longer made sense. Minute 17, then minute 15 again, then 23, as though the highway were looping over its own chronology. The snow had thinned to dust, but the air shimmered with cold. When I reached minute 24, she was there again, standing by the sign, coat whipping in the wind that I couldn't feel. The green light bled through her, making her seem carved out of smoke. Her expression was different now, less patient, more expectant, as though she were waiting for me to understand something simple that had always been true. I slowed, rolled the window down. "Is this what you meant?" I said. "Is this how I give them back?" Her mouth moved, but I didn't hear words, just the faint hum of the engine, bending itself into a shape that almost resembled speech. "Keep driving," I thought she said. So I did. By minute 29, fatigue had settled into something deeper than tiredness. I wasn't sure when I'd last eaten. The coffee in the thermos was cold, tasting faintly of metal. My reflection in the windshield had changed too, the eyes sunken, the skin pale in the green light. I began to realize that the road didn't have direction anymore. The compass on the dash spun slow circles, unable to decide between north and south. The line of the highway flickered like film, repeating the same stretch of faded asphalt. That was when I saw the truck. It was parked on the shoulder, engine off, cab dark, my truck, or something close enough to it. Same dents on the bumper, same cracked headlight, same strip of duct tape on the passenger mirror. I passed it slowly, staring through the window. The cab was empty. The driver's seat was still warm. In the rearview mirror, the reflection of the truck stayed behind, but the driver's seat wasn't empty anymore. A figure sat there, hands on the wheel staring forward. The green glow from the exit sign lit its face. It was mine. I looked away, heart hammering, but the mirror still held the image. The figure smiled a fraction too slow and lifted its wrist. The watch on that reflection ticked once, perfectly in time with mine. "Sending zu scharfen." 3 minutes returned. The voice came back as the signs grew fewer. It didn't whisper now. It spoke softly, steadily, almost with affection. You remember now. Time isn't stolen. It's only misplaced. You left it scattered, like crumbs. Keep driving. I drove until the line between road and sky blurred into a single, endless horizon. The air shimmered with faint pulses of green. The signs grew dimmer, their lettering peeling away, until the last one appeared a single crooked frame leaning into the wind. Minute 41. I slowed the truck and coasted to a stop beside it. The world held still. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade. The light from the sign blinked once, twice, then steadied, filling the cab with that familiar green glow. She was standing under it, closer than before, close enough that I could see the fine lines in her face, the calmness in her eyes. She looked less like an apparition now and more like someone who had been waiting a very long time. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me, but it didn't bite. It was the kind of cold that feels like a hand resting on your shoulder. She smiled faintly as I approached. "It's all here," she said. "All 41. The road keeps what you give. What happens now? You keep going." "Where?" She looked past me, toward the horizon. "There's only forward, but you'll know when it ends." The wind moved through her coat, stirring it gently. I noticed for the first time that her wrist was bare. No watch, no time. "You took them from me," she said softly, not accusing, just stating. "When you stopped the first time, when you looked too long at the reflection. But it's all right, they've come home." I looked down. My watch had changed again. 3:17. You blinked. 3:17. The second hand was moving now, slow but steady. The tick loud enough to hear over the wind. When I looked up, she was gone. Only the sign remained, humming faintly, casting light over the snow that wasn't snow anymore but a thin, endless sheet of pale dust. I climbed back into the cab. The engine turned over once and caught, the hum of the diesel returning like an old song. The radio flickered to life on its own, a low, bluesy tune winding through static. It sounded familiar, though I couldn't place it. I put the truck in gear and rolled forward. The road stretched ahead, wide and empty, a vein of dark cutting through the pale horizon. The green glow faded behind me, one pulse at a time, until there was only the steady rhythm of wheels and time moving again. The watch ticked, sure and patient. 3:17. 3:17. For the first time, in what might have been days or years, I felt the weight of movement. The road was real beneath me. The horizon began to rise, painted with a hint of dawn that might have been a lie but was good enough to believe in. I didn't look back. The sun rose like it had forgotten how to do it properly. A dull light slid across the horizon, flattening the desert into shades of ash and bone. I watched it in the mirrors, in the cracks of the windshield, in the slow sweep of the wipers as they cleared away a frost that kept returning. The watch on my wrist ticked softly, steady again, each click a reminder that time had decided to forgive me for now. I'd been driving long enough that the miles had stopped meaning anything. The road was smoother than I remembered, almost polished, the kind of asphalt that swallows sound instead of echoing it. The radio played the same slow blues tune on a loop, the voice of a man who sounded older than the world, his words half swallowed by static. Between verses I could hear faint breathing, sometimes a soft hum that seemed to come from the dashboard itself. It was peaceful, in its way, empty, clean. When the next sign appeared, I almost missed it. The green glow was weaker now, bleeding into the pale daylight until it was little more than a shadow of color. There was no building beside it this time, just the post, half buried in sand, the word exit hanging crooked. Beneath it, in smaller print, almost invisible, were the words, "Thank you for your return." I slowed the truck until it rolled to a stop. The engine hummed low, the dashboard vibrating under my palms. A thin wind blew across the plain, carrying nothing but its own exhaustion. I sat there for a long time, listening. Then, from somewhere deep in the cab, came a sound soft, rhythmic, the faint ticking of another watch. Not mine. It came from the glove compartment. I hesitated before opening it. The air that spilled out smelled faintly of cold metal and wet dust. Inside lay a small silver wristwatch, the glass cracked, the hands frozen at 3:41. The same time. I picked it up carefully. The metal was warmer than it should have been. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, was a name I didn't know. Ellen M. The tick from my own watch faltered once, then steadied again. Outside, the wind shifted. The green light blinked once, just enough to catch the reflection in the cracked glass of the new watch. For a heartbeat, I saw her again standing beside the sign, coat moving gently in the air that I couldn't feel, her eyes calm, distant, and unbearably sad. She lifted a hand, not to wave, to point, behind me. I turned in the seat. The highway was empty, but the air above it shimmered with heat, or maybe it was something else. Shapes flickered there, distant outlines of cars that might have been mine, headlights crossing paths like ghosts. And for a moment I understood that all of them were me. Every version of me that had stopped too long, or looked too deeply, or refused to listen. Each of them driving the same road, each trapped in a moment that had no end. The radio crackled, the singer's voice fading. The woman's voice came through again, soft, almost kind. Every road loop somewhere. You've reached yours. And I wanted to answer, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt full of frost. The light ahead blinked again, just once, and in that blink, I realized it wasn't blinking, it was signaling. 2 short pulses, 1 long, the kind of rhythm you might use to mark the passing of time. A chill ran through me. I started the engine again. The hum grew stronger, deeper, like a heartbeat waking up. The green glow brightened behind the windshield, spilling across the cab, painting everything in that color I had come to fear and recognize. I drove. The landscape began to change, subtly at first. The horizon shifted higher, the road tilting upward, cutting through low ridges of stone that I didn't remember. The snow vanished entirely, replaced by dry wind and dust. The air smelled of metal and ozone. The watch read 4:10. It felt like progress, but the sky was wrong. The sun hadn't moved. It hung in the same place, weak and colorless, casting shadows that didn't match the curve of the road. The longer I drove, the more it seemed to flatten, until it was just a pale disk painted on the air. At mile marker 300, I noticed the green glow again. Another exit sign, but this one wasn't beside the road, it was directly ahead, hovering above the asphalt like a traffic signal without a pole. Its light steady, unwavering. The radio hissed once. The engine sputtered. "Not this time," I whispered. "I'm done." The hum in the cab deepened, a vibration that shook through the steering column, through my bones. The green light grew brighter, spilling through the windshield until I couldn't see the road anymore. Then the truck stopped. No impact, no sound, just the sudden, absolute absence of motion. The world outside had turned white. Not snowlight, pure, weightless, the kind that feels like it's listening. In the silence, a voice spoke. Not hers. Not mine. Something older. "There's always 1 more minute left to give." The watch on my wrist ticked once more, then stopped. Sundance Shrifen. Again, I looked up. The exit sign was gone. The road, the desert, the sky, everything had dissolved into that endless, pale horizon. For a moment I thought I could see movement within it, figures walking along unseen roads, headlights glimmering like stars beneath the surface of the world. I took a breath and reached for the ignition. The key turned easily, though the engine made no sound. The radio came to life instead. Static. Then her voice. "You've come back." I laughed softly. "I never left." "Then drive," she said. "Drive until you find the next exit. You'll know it when you see the sign." The light returned distant, green, pulsing like a slow heartbeat on the far edge of the horizon. I pressed the pedal. The world moved. The hum returned, blending with the music still playing somewhere inside the static. The road formed beneath the wheels, mile by mile, drawing itself as I went. My reflection in the windshield smiled faintly, a fraction too late. The watch ticked once, then stopped. Sundance Shrifen. Story 3. The third lock. I moved in on a Thursday. It had rained the night before, and the hallway still smelled faintly of wet carpet and something older, something that lived behind the plaster. The landlord met me on the steps, a kind man with the kind of eyes that never quite meet yours. He handed me a ring with 2 keys and said, "You'll want to change the locks eventually." I didn't ask why. The building wasn't old enough to be charming, but it was tired enough to have forgotten its shape. The walls leaned inward slightly, like a person listening too hard. The air held the soft hum of the city's undercurrent pipes, wires, neighbors breathing through shared walls. Inside, the flat was smaller than I'd remembered. The living room faced the street, where a single street lamp threw its light across the glass every few seconds as cars passed. The bedroom door didn't close properly. The floorboards, though polished, sighed under weight, and the smell, that strange, faintly sweet dampness, lingered. I unpacked slowly, 1 box at a time. Books first, then clothes, then the small things that make a place yours. A framed photo, a chipped mug, a lamp with a soft amber shade. By dusk, the apartment felt almost human. That night, I locked the door twice, once with the latch, once with the bolt. The keys fit perfectly. The sound clean, final. Sleep came quickly. Sometime past midnight, a noise woke me. Not loud, just a small click, the kind of sound that might have come from the pipes cooling, or the wood shifting as the night air changed. But it was distinct, deliberate, too precise to be random. It sounded like a lock turning. I sat up, heart steady but alert, listening. The air was still. The light from the street lamp moved across the wall in slow intervals, making the shadows of the blinds stretch and contract like quiet breathing. Nothing moved. When I finally stood, the floor answered with its familiar sigh. I walked to the door and checked both locks. Secure. The chain still in place. But as I leaned closer, I saw something strange at the bottom of the door. A small patch of worn carpet, a perfect circle, about the size of a coin. The fibers were pressed flat, smoother than the rest, as if something had rubbed against that spot over and over. I crouched down, tracing it with my fingertips. The texture was different, colder, harder. Beneath the carpet, the faint outline of a metal shape pressed against the fabric. A keyhole, hidden. I peeled back the corner of the carpet. The nails came free too easily, as if someone had already done it before. Beneath it, the metal was dull, tarnished, but unmistakable. A third lock. No handle, no latch. Just a keyhole sunk deep into the door frame, closer to the floor than any lock had a reason to be. I touched it lightly. The metal was warm. I remember whispering to no one, "Why 3?" There was no answer. The next morning I called the landlord, tried to sound casual. Was there ever another lock installed here, near the floor? A pause, then a laugh that wasn't quite real. "Oh, that old thing. Probably a repair from before the new frames. Ignore it. Doesn't work anymore. Should I remove it?" Another pause. "Better not. Some of the old doors have strange fittings. You could damage the wood." That night, I covered it again with the carpet, pressing the nails back in. But the shape stayed in my mind, that small, patient circle waiting near the ground, like an eye watching the bottom of the room. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet sometimes. I worked from home, so the rhythm of the flat became my clock. Kettle boiling, radiator ticking, footsteps in the hallway above. But I began to notice small changes. The air in the bedroom would cool suddenly, though the radiator was warm. The window latch would rattle once softly and stop. The shadows of the blinds seemed longer than they should be, as if the light outside was stretching them on purpose. And sometimes, at night, I would wake to the faint sound of metal shifting inside the wood. It never came from the latch or the bolt, always lower, near the floor. I began placing small objects on the carpet before I went to bed. Coins, a pencil, once a tiny ceramic bird I'd kept since childhood. Each morning they were moved an inch or two, pushed aside as though something had been there and wanted space. I stopped calling the landlord. I didn't want to hear that laugh again. By the end of the second week, The flat had developed its own rhythm. The lights would flicker once every evening at the same hour, not when they came on, but after. The floorboards in the hallway began to creak at intervals that didn't match my movement. I told myself it was the neighbors, or the heat, but I started locking the bedroom door at night. Then, on the third Thursday, exactly 2 weeks after moving in, the power went out. It was just after 11. I was reading in bed when the lamp blinked twice and died, leaving only the sound of the rain against the window. The sudden silence of the city was immense, like the world had taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. I found my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam caught on the edges of the room, books, dresser, door, and there, at the bottom of the door, the carpet had been pushed back. Not torn or lifted, just folded neatly, exposing the small circle of tarnished metal. The third lock, its surface glistened faintly, as though wet. When I leaned closer, I heard it the faintest sound, deep inside the doorframe, a slow, deliberate turning. Once, then twice, and then a click. When I was little, I used to have this habit of pressing my ear to doors, not because I was trying to eavesdrop, but because I liked the sound of what wasn't being said on the other side. The quiet there was different, deeper, more honest, as if the wood could remember what had passed through it. That was the thought that came to me the night the power went out in my new apartment, the night the third lock turned on its own. At first, I thought the sound had come from inside my head, that half-dreaming state where imagination can reach out and rearrange the air. But when I crouched down, the metal was trembling. Not violently, just enough for the light from my phone to catch on the edge of the keyhole and make it glimmer, like an eye trying to open against sleep. The carpet around it was smooth now, not folded, and the faint smell of something metallic hung near the floor, subtle but sharp, like the scent that lingers after striking an old key against stone. I waited, crouched in the silence, feeling the chill rise from the tiles through my knees, waiting for something to happen, though I didn't know what. When the noise finally stopped, the air in the room seemed to still in sympathy, and I realized that even the rain against the windows had gone quiet. My phone light dimmed for a moment, just a small flicker, and for that instant I saw something impossible. The keyhole had deepened, not in shape or color, but in depth, as if it no longer belonged to the door, but to a space behind it. Something hollow and lightless that had been waiting for attention. I touched it. The surface was warm, pulsing faintly, like the metal was breathing. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the silence grow, the way it seemed to move around me, finding new corners, settling into new rhythms. Every now and then I heard a soft tap against the wall behind my headboard, or the distant creak of a floorboard that wasn't mine. Once, around 3 a.m, I thought I heard the faint rustle of paper beneath the carpet, as though someone were sliding notes back and forth beneath the floor. I told myself it was nerves, exhaustion, the leftover hum of city noise replaying in my imagination. But at dawn, when light began to bleed through the blinds, I noticed the faint imprint of a hand against the bottom of the door, small, almost childlike, the fingers pressed outward from the other side. The next day I tried to forget it. I went out early, walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, bought groceries I didn't need just to hear the sound of another person's voice. The streets around Beach were quiet that morning, a little too quiet for a city street, and when I came back up the stairs to my apartment, the sound of my keys against the lock felt like an intrusion. Inside, the air smelled different, sharper, as though the rain from the night before had never dried. The carpet was back in place, the light through the window calm and ordinary, but something subtle had shifted a sense of being watched by the space itself, of the walls holding their breath. That evening, while unpacking an old box of records, I noticed that the hum in the apartment had changed pitch. It wasn't the refrigerator, nor the radiator. It came from the direction of the door, low and steady, like a tone carried through the frame. When I stood near it, I could feel the vibration through the floorboards. I leaned closer than I meant to, and pressed my ear to the wood. At first, nothing, just the hollow thrum of my own pulse. But then, softly, so faint I almost missed it, came the sound of movement, not footsteps, not breathing, something slower, a drag, a scrape, as though someone were tracing a finger along the inside of the door, following the edges of the third lock. I whispered, "Hello?" The sound stopped. Then, from somewhere deep within the door, came a faint echo of my own voice, quiet and distorted, as if replayed from a great distance. Not a response, but a reflection, my words, looping through the hollow space. I took a step back, heart pounding, but the air around me stayed still. I told myself the wood was playing tricks, that old doors trapped sounds, that maybe the building itself was answering. I wanted to believe that. That night, I left the lights on in the living room. The glow bled under the door to the hallway, cutting a narrow strip of safety against the dark. Around midnight, the hum began again, slower this time, rising and falling in gentle waves. I sat up in bed, listening, counting the rhythm, realizing with a chill that it matched the pattern of my breathing. Each inhale, a soft vibration. Each exhale, the faintest creak. I covered my mouth, held my breath, and for a few seconds the sound stopped, then resumed on its own, steady, unbothered, as though something else in the room had simply taken over the rhythm for me. It was then that I understood. Whatever was on the other side of that lock wasn't trying to get in. It was trying to remember how. The following morning, I found the carpet pulled back again. This time it wasn't neat. The nails had been twisted free and scattered, the edges frayed as though dragged outward from beneath. The keyhole gleamed faintly in the morning light, the metal spotless, too clean. I pressed my hand to the wood above it and felt the faint impression of a heartbeat. I spent the day avoiding that part of the room, keeping myself busy with anything that made noise. The kettle, the faucet, the radio turned up just enough to fill the silence. But noise only made the quiet stronger when it returned, thicker, as if layered. By evening, the light from the street had begun to flicker again, casting thin bands of shadow across the walls, and I could feel the apartment's attention turning inward, like an animal curling up in its own skin. I made tea I didn't drink, sat by the window watching the street, and tried to imagine what the door had been built for, why anyone would install a lock so low, so hidden. The thought came unbidden. Maybe it wasn't meant to keep something out. Maybe it was meant to keep something in. Just before midnight, the lights dimmed once more. I felt it before I heard it, the low vibration in the floorboards, rising gently like a held breath. The lock began to turn, slowly, the sound soft but deliberate. I wanted to move, to stop it, but my body didn't respond. The air had thickened, pressing against me, the weight of silence almost physical. The bolt turned once, then again. A soft click followed, and then a sound I will never forget. The sigh of air escaping from a place that has been sealed too long. It was warm, almost human, carrying with it the faintest trace of something familiar, dust, paper, and the faint sweetness of long decayed flowers. I knelt down, trembling, my phone light quivering across the frame. The keyhole was no longer empty. Behind the glassy black of its center, I could see motion, slow, unfocused, like the surface of water disturbed by breath. A faint whisper came through, words without shape, language without sound. I leaned closer. For a moment, I thought I heard my name. Then everything went still. The hum faded, the air loosened its grip, and the light in the room returned to normal, warm and flat and indifferent. The carpet lay torn back, the nails scattered like punctuation marks in a sentence I didn't understand. I covered the lock again, pressing the fabric down with shaking hands, though I knew it was useless. When I finally crawled into bed, the sound of the city had returned, cars in the distance, footsteps on the stairs, life pushing against the edges of the strange quiet that had settled in my home. But beneath it all, so faint that I might have imagined it, came the slow, patient turning of metal against wood, deep in the bones of the door. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, I couldn't tell if it was still turning, or if my heartbeat had simply learned to sound like it. Morning never arrived the same way twice after that night. Light still filtered through the blinds, but it came with a certain hesitation, as if unsure whether it belonged here. The apartment seemed to hold its breath while it happened, each surface waiting for permission to exist again. I would wake and listen to the radiator ticking, The hum of pipes, the occasional sigh of the wood, and all of it sounded slightly out of order, like an orchestra tuning to a note no one else could hear. I began avoiding the door. It stood there, quiet and obedient, pretending to be part of an ordinary wall, but every time I passed it, the air cooled. Not by much, just a degree or two, enough to make me aware of my own breath, enough to feel the faint pull of something gathering behind it. The carpet I had used to hide the third lock refused to stay flat now. Each morning, the corners lifted by a fraction, as though the floor itself were pushing upward to remind me it was still there. By the end of that week, I was sleeping less. I would drift near dawn, wake at the smallest sound, and lie still, listening. The apartment had a new vocabulary. Soft knocks that came from nowhere, the faint creak of hinges that didn't exist, the rhythmic whisper of air moving through unseen gaps. I had lived alone before, but this felt different. It was solitude that listened back. One night, while washing dishes, I caught a reflection in the window. At first, it was only my own shape, blurred by the steam. Then I noticed a second outline behind me, smaller, crouched near the door. I turned quickly, and there was nothing, only the lamplight brushing the wall. The carpet curled in that same soft wave. When I looked back at the window, the reflection was gone, but the outline of the second figure lingered faintly, an afterimage that took longer than it should have to fade. The next morning, I found my spare key lying on the kitchen counter. It should have been on the hook near the door. The metal was warm to the touch, though the apartment was cold. I slipped it into my pocket, uncertain whether I was protecting it or keeping it close for the wrong reason. Around noon, the hallway outside filled with the sound of movement, footsteps, the quiet murmur of neighbors carrying groceries, a door slamming 2 floors down, but when I looked through the peephole, the corridor was empty. The light in the hall flickered once, and for a moment, I saw what looked like a faint handprint smeared low across the inside of my own door, just above the place where the hidden lock slept. It wasn't dirt, not dust, but something softer, almost translucent, like the residue left by breath on glass. When I reached down to touch it, the print vanished. The wood beneath felt cool, but dry. That night, unable to rest, I sat by the door with my back against the wall and listened. It's strange how easily you can begin to hear patterns in things you don't understand. There was a rhythm now, a slow pulse that rose through the floorboards, a muffled echo that responded whenever I shifted my weight. After a while, I could almost imagine words forming inside that rhythm, the suggestion of syllables lost between beats. I started whispering to it without meaning to, half questions, half apologies, as though talking to an animal that might come closer if I kept my voice soft. The wood beneath my shoulder felt warm. The air smelled faintly of rain. Somewhere near 3 a.m., I dozed off. I dreamed that the door had been replaced by a mirror. The frame was the same, but the surface shimmered faintly, holding not my reflection, but the memory of a room I had never seen. The walls were painted the same color, but the furniture was arranged differently, as if someone else had tried to recreate my apartment from memory and failed. A lamp stood in the wrong corner. The photo on the shelf faced the wrong direction. On the other side of the mirror, another version of me was sitting at a small table, head resting on her hand, listening to a sound only she could hear. Her expression was calm. When she looked up, our eyes met, and the world shifted. She stood, reached toward the glass, and mouthed something I couldn't understand. I woke with my heart pounding and the faint smell of dust and varnish in the air. The clock read 2:59. I hadn't moved. But the carpet in front of the door had folded itself back again, neatly this time, exposing the small, waiting circle of the third lock. I could see the faint gleam of metal, even in the dim light. The hole looked deeper than before. I found myself staring into it, expecting to see only shadow. But there was color subtle, moving, like light reflecting off water far below the surface. The faint current of air brushed my face, warm against the chill of the room. Something whispered. Not a voice exactly, more like the sound of a word trying to remember how to form itself. I leaned closer, one hand on the floor to steady myself. For an instant, I smelled something familiar. Soap. Perfume. the faint sweetness of someone's skin after sleep. I whispered without thinking, "Who's there?" The air behind the door responded with the soft groan of shifting wood. The temperature dropped enough for my breath to show. I reached toward the lock, fingertips barely brushing the edge of the metal, and felt it twitch. A small movement, almost polite. The whisper returned, clearer this time, shaped like a memory rather than sound. "You left the door open." I jerked my hand back. The room spun. My mind raced through every possibility. Neighbors, old wiring, the echo of my own thoughts. But the words had been too distinct, too knowing. They carried the calm certainty of something that wasn't guessing. I stayed awake until morning, the lamp burning low beside me. When light finally seeped through the blinds, the air in the apartment felt lighter, but the door looked different. The wood around the handle had darkened slightly, as though touched by damp fingers. The third lock, now half exposed where the carpet refused to settle, gleamed with a faint trace of moisture. Over the next few days, the apartment began to show signs of doubling. I would set my mug on the counter and find it later on the windowsill. The radio would switch stations when I left the room. I began hearing footsteps that followed the same pattern as mine, half a beat behind, like an echo waiting for permission to overtake its source. One evening, I caught the reflection of the hallway in the glass of a framed photo and saw myself standing at the far end of it. Not now, but earlier, the same clothes, the same posture, but her eyes were turned toward the bottom of the door, watching something I couldn't see. When I turned around, the hallway was empty. I tried to leave once, packing a small bag, but when I opened the door to the hall, the light outside was wrong, dim, heavy. The air thick, with the smell of dust. The walls seemed narrower, the carpet older. The building felt unfamiliar, as though I had stepped into someone else's version of it. I closed the door again and sat on the floor until my breathing slowed. That night, I dreamed I was standing on the other side of the third lock, looking through it into my own apartment. The view was upside down, tilted slightly, the furniture hanging from the ceiling, like the remains of a thought. I could see myself asleep on the couch, one arm hanging over the side. When I whispered my own name, the figure stirred, and the lock between us glowed faintly, a pulse of light that lasted only a second before fading. I woke with a taste of metal on my tongue. The clock read 3:03. The apartment was still. The only sound was the soft creak of the floor as I stood. I walked to the door and sat beside it again, palms flat on the wood. The vibration there was gentle, rhythmic, almost comforting. I whispered, "What are you?" A pause, long enough to convince me there would be no answer. Then, quietly, through the grain of the wood, came the faintest echo of my own voice repeating the question back to me, softer, slower, and not quite in sync. And behind that echo, barely audible, another sound began, the turn of a key, deep inside the frame, unlocking something I couldn't see. I should have moved. I should have stood up, opened the windows, turned on every light. But I didn't. I stayed there, listening, counting each slow rotation as if it were a heartbeat. When it stopped, the silence that followed felt enormous, like the air had been rearranged. The door remained closed. The carpet lifted gently, a small wave of motion, and then lay still. In that silence, I heard my own breath come back to me through the lock, slower, lower, belonging to someone else. By the time the next week arrived, I no longer trusted the light. It still came through the windows, soft and diffused, but it seemed less like sunlight and more like the imitation of it. A light that remembered how to be warm but had forgotten how to belong to a day. Every morning looked the same dim pattern of blinds across the wall, the same hush before the pipes remembered to breathe. I moved through the apartment quietly, as though afraid of waking something that was pretending to sleep. The lock had changed again. I hadn't touched it, hadn't dared to peel back the carpet since that night, but the air around the door had grown noticeably colder. The wood had begun to warp near the base, a slow swelling that made the bottom edge of the door press tightly into the frame. Sometimes, when I passed too close, I could feel the faint vibration of metal beneath the surface, not a rattle but a pulse, subtle and steady, like the echo of a hidden mechanism counting seconds that didn't exist anymore. The reflection in the window began to arrive earlier each evening. It no longer waited for the dark. I would be pouring water into the kettle, and in the glass of the cabinet door I'd see myself, a fraction too late. A lag, barely perceptible. The head turning after I'd already turned. The hand moving in the wrong rhythm. It wasn't frightening at first. There was something almost graceful about it. The way she moved, slower, smoother, as though time obeyed her differently. But over the days, that grace grew uncanny. The reflection began to hold my gaze longer than I could hold hers. I would look away, count to 3, then glance back, and she would still be staring, waiting, patient, certain. One evening, as I reached to switch off the lamp, I saw her smile. Not my smile. Smaller, more deliberate. And then she raised her hand, slowly, palm open toward the window, mirroring me with a precision that was no longer mimicry but invitation. That night, I dreamed of keys, dozens of them, old and tarnished, hanging from invisible threads that stretched upward into darkness. They swayed gently as though in a current I couldn't feel. I reached for one, and as soon as my fingers closed around it, all the others began to turn, hundreds of locks clicking open at once, a wave of sound rolling through the dark like distant applause. The air smelled of wood and iron and something faintly sweet, like the scent that clings to paper left too long in a drawer. When I woke, my hand was closed around something cold. For a moment, I thought it was real, a key, small and rusted, but it was only the shape of one, pressed into the skin of my palm, a ghost of the dream etched into the warmth of waking. The impression lingered long after I opened my fingers. Later that morning, I found a small patch of rust-colored dust near the door, a scatter of fine particles that hadn't been there before. When I brushed them aside, the carpet snagged, catching on something sharp underneath. I pulled it back just enough to see the faint edge of metal peeking through, not the lock this time, but something else. A thin slit running parallel to the floor, as though another seam had formed in the wood. I ran my fingers along it, felt the texture not smooth, but ridged, almost like the grooves of a keyhole. The air pressed against me, heavy, waiting. I stood up quickly, heart pounding, and covered the mark again. For the rest of the day, I tried not to look toward the door, but it was impossible to ignore the quiet that seemed to gather around it, a silence thick enough to distort the sound of my own movement. Every step I took came back to me delayed, softer, as though absorbed by something listening from the other side. That night, the reflection didn't wait for me. When I walked into the living room, she was already there, standing by the window, her head tilted slightly toward the door. The air shimmered faintly around her, a distortion like heat. Her eyes caught the light differently, a subtle gleam, not brightness but depth, the kind of gleam that belongs to polished metal. I didn't move. Neither did she. The hum of the radiator faltered, and the whole room seemed to hold itself between two heartbeats. When she finally spoke, her voice didn't come from her mouth but from the space between us, like the echo of a whisper trapped in the glass. "You left it open." The words were calm, neither question nor accusation, just a statement of fact. I wanted to deny it, but my throat closed around the sound. She tilted her head again, a slow, familiar motion, and took one step closer to the inside of the reflection. The movement rippled faintly across the glass, as though the air between us were a thin layer of water. I backed away until my shoulders touched the door. The wood was warm again, warmer than it had been in days. I could feel the faint hum of the hidden lock behind me, turning in time with my heartbeat. She lifted her hand once more, palm against the glass, and though the distance between us hadn't changed, I felt a rush of air move across my skin, not cold, but charged, like the moment before a storm. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. When they did, she was gone. The room looked ordinary again. The reflection showed only me, pale, tired, breathing too fast. But the carpet had lifted. A single corner, just enough to reveal the dull glint of the third lock, now fully exposed. The keyhole was dark, deeper than I remembered, and from its depths came a faint glimmer, a suggestion of movement far beyond the wood. I sat there until morning watching it. Sometimes the light inside the keyhole pulsed gently, a rhythm that felt familiar. I began to recognize it. 2 beats, a pause, then 3 more. My own pulse, replayed. I pressed my fingers to my wrist and felt it match perfectly. On the 4th day after that, the reflection began appearing in other places, the glass of a picture frame, the dark shine of the television screen, the silver edge of a spoon left in the sink. Always the same image. Her standing near the door, head turned slightly toward me, as if waiting for me to finish something I hadn't begun. The boundaries between her world and mine had grown thin. Sometimes I caught her moving when I wasn't, and the movement would continue for a few seconds after I looked away, like a dream refusing to fade. I stopped using mirrors altogether. It didn't help. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, I heard the sound of a key turning slow, deliberate, unmistakable. The lock at the top of the door remained still. The bolt didn't move, but from near the floor came the soft click of the 3rd lock releasing. The air shifted instantly, the temperature dropping as though a window had opened somewhere deep inside the walls. I stood frozen, watching the bottom edge of the door. A faint line of light appeared there, so thin it might have been imagination, but it spread, slow and steady, a pale glow seeping outward like breath. The hum in the room grew louder, resolving into a low, constant tone that made the air vibrate. Then, through that light, I saw movement, a shadow bending forward, fingers pressing against the inside of the wood. The grain of the door stretched beneath the pressure, not cracking, but yielding, the surface bending outward like skin under touch. I whispered, "Stop," though I don't know who I was speaking to. The hum deepened, a sound like wind through a hollow space. And then, quietly, another voice joined it. My voice. It came from the door itself. Soft and measured. "I'm here." "And?" I stumbled backward, breath caught in my chest, the sound echoing inside my skull. The glow from the keyhole flared once, bright enough to cast my shadow against the opposite wall, and for an instant, I saw her standing there, not in the reflection this time, but in the room, the same posture, the same eyes, the same faint smile. Her presence was neither solid nor transparent, a shimmer of something half-remembered. She raised her hand, and I felt my own hand rise to meet it, unbidden. The motion was perfectly mirrored, as if some quiet agreement had already been made between us long ago. The air around us tightened, every molecule holding its breath. "You can't keep both sides closed," she said, or maybe I said it. The sound came from both of us at once, layered, impossible to tell apart. "One always opens. The lock only remembers the first hand that turned it." The light pulsed again, softer now, like the heartbeat of something satisfied. The reflection vanished from the walls, the glass, the metal surfaces. The room returned to stillness. The carpet lay flat. Only the faint scent of dust and warmth remained, like the air after someone has just left the room. When I finally dared to touch the door, the wood was cool again. The keyhole was dark, empty, perfectly ordinary. But from somewhere deep inside the frame came a single soft click, the sound of a key turning once, deliberately, as though someone on the other side were locking me in. The morning after the last sound of the lock, I woke to a world that no longer looked right. The light through the blinds was the wrong color, too white, too steady, and when I tried to open the window for air, it didn't move. The glass didn't rattle, didn't even tremble against the frame. It felt less like something transparent and more like something solid pretending to be clear. The apartment was silent, except for the faint hum that had been there since the first night, but it had changed pitch lower now, almost melodic, rising and falling, like a human breath. I sat at the table for a long time, watching the dust drift through the air. It didn't fall. The particles hovered in slow, deliberate motion, moving sideways as if drawn toward the door. The carpet was flat again, perfectly so, the edges sharp and aligned. The place where the lock hid beneath it looked untouched, innocent. I almost believed it was over. I wanted to, but when I stood and turned toward the mirror by the kitchen, the world behind my reflection lagged. My body moved. My reflection waited a second, then followed. I raised a hand, and she raised hers, but slower, gentler, as though testing a new rhythm. Her face was mine, but quieter. She looked calm, patient, the way I must have looked once before I learned to be afraid. Then she opened her mouth and whispered something I couldn't hear, though I felt it in the air around me, a vibration, a thought that didn't need sound to exist. I turned my head, listening, and for a brief, unguarded moment, I thought I understood what she was saying. She wanted me to open the door. I told myself it was exhaustion, that the mind, when deprived of rest, begins to create company. But the thought lodged deep. By afternoon, it had become a pulse. By dusk, it was a voice again, soft, rhythmic, as familiar as my own heartbeat. I walked to the door. The carpet was warmer now. My hand hovered above it, uncertain, before I finally knelt and peeled it back one last time. The nails came away easily, as though they had been waiting. The lock beneath gleamed in the amber light, clean, almost new. The metal no longer looked like it belonged to the door. It looked alive, a small breathing thing that had been buried under fabric and dust. I leaned closer. "Are you there?" I whispered. The air on the other side moved, answering without sound, a slow exhale that fogged the edge of the keyhole for half a heartbeat. I could smell rain again, the same scent from my first night here. And beneath it, something else, my own perfume, faint but unmistakable. The voice came not from behind the door but from inside my head, smooth and calm and painfully familiar. "It's not a door. It's a mirror that forgot itself." I didn't move. My knees pressed into the floorboards, the hum of the lock vibrating up through my hands. The light in the room dimmed, shadows stretching long across the walls. For a moment, I thought I saw the shape of someone standing in the far corner, blurred and still, the faint outline of hair moving as though underwater. I whispered again, "What are you?" And she or I answered, the part that stayed. The lock began to turn. Slowly, patiently, one soft click after another, each rotation deeper, older, as if replaying an action done many times before. I should have run. I should have called for help, but my body had already decided. I pressed my palm flat against the door, felt the warmth spread through the wood, into my skin, into the bone. For an instant, the world split. The room around me folded inward. The air rippled, bending light into impossible angles. I saw the other apartment again, the one from the dream, identical but reversed, everything reflected and misplaced. The lamp glowed in the wrong corner. The photo faced the wrong way. And in the center of that mirror world, she stood beside the door, her hand pressed against the same spot as mine. The key turned one last time, and then the air gave way. It wasn't a fall or a pull. It was an exchange, two halves of the same motion meeting in the middle. The hum dissolved into silence. For a moment, everything was weightless. Then the world righted itself with a soft sigh, like lungs filling after a long pause. I was still kneeling. The carpet was smooth beneath my fingers. The door was closed, but the apartment was different now. The air was colder. The colors slightly wrong, each one just a shade too deep, as if the light came from beneath the surface instead of above it. The clock on the wall ticked backward for a few seconds before catching itself, and my reflection in the mirror by the kitchen moved before I did. She smiled, faintly. I stood, heart hammering, staring at the face that wore my own expression better than I could. Behind her, the door to her version of the apartment stood slightly open, a sliver of light leaking through, bright and steady, like the edge of a sunrise that never reached this side. I turned toward my door. It looked perfectly ordinary, the same paint, the same faint scuff near the bottom where I had dropped a box my first day here. But the warmth was gone. The wood was cool to the touch, and when I pressed my ear against it, there was no sound at all. No hum, no heartbeat, just emptiness. In the mirror, she watched me. Her door was still open. The light behind her flickered once, then steadied. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she reached out and touched the edge of her door, and as she did, The reflection of mine began to tremble. The knob turned a fraction. The bottom edge lifted slightly, just enough for a breath of air to escape. I stepped back, whispering, "Don't," but she only tilted her head and whispered something I couldn't hear. The sound never reached my ears. It went straight to my pulse. The carpet shifted beneath my feet. I looked down. The third lock was gone. In its place was a faint outline of where it had been. A pale circle burned into the wood like a scar. I looked up again, and she was closer now, not in the mirror but in the space between reflections. That thin sliver where glass forgets which side it belongs to. Her lips moved once more. Slower this time. "You're on the wrong side." The light in her world dimmed. The door behind her swung shut, and mine opened. Just an inch, enough for the scent of rain to drift through. I didn't close it. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me still believed that if I kept it open, we could trade again, that I could step back into the life that still remembered warmth and breath and mornings that changed. Now the days pass without hours. The light comes and goes like a tide. The hum never stops. It has become my heartbeat, my pulse echoing through the wood. Sometimes I press my hand to the door, and I can feel her on the other side, doing the same. Sometimes, when the air is still, I hear the sound of keys turning one, then another, then a third, the slow, patient sound of someone else learning the shape of the lock I left behind. And I realize that maybe I was never the one who opened it. Maybe I was only the one who waited long enough for the other to come through. Story 4. The Placeholder. Night shifts at the museum were quiet in a way that almost felt artificial. The city outside still breathed, distant and steady, but inside the storage building, time seemed to collapse into a single, unbroken moment. The air carried that familiar scent paper, oil, the faint musk of linen that had been wrapped around objects older than memory itself. If you stood still long enough, you could almost hear the dust settling. I'd been doing the job for 4 years. Inventory clerk. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that required me to understand the things I cataloged, only to count them, label them, and ensure they stayed where history had decided to keep them. I'd convinced myself it was enough. There was comfort in repetition, in the ritual of record and silence. The night belonged to people like me. Watchers, not participants. The storage building was separate from the main museum, an older structure, converted from a printing warehouse decades ago. Its walls were thick, lined with narrow windows that looked out onto a courtyard where no one went anymore. The air inside never quite warmed, even in summer. I had a small office in the far corner, barely larger than a closet. Its only decoration, a flickering fluorescent light, and a clock that ticked half a beat slower than it should. Most nights were the same. I'd clock in, walk the rows of shelving, check the humidity levels, write down serial numbers. Every few hours, I'd stop by the break room for coffee that tasted faintly of metal. Sometimes I'd listen to the hum of the ventilation system and imagine it as a kind of mechanical heartbeat, keeping the building alive. That particular night began like all the others. I remember because nothing stood out, not until the end of my second round. Section D, textile storage. The air there always smelled faintly of mothballs and something dry, almost powdery. Rows of metal racks held garments wrapped in plastic, each one tagged and dated. Some had been there longer than I'd been alive. I was halfway through counting when I noticed a rack at the far end that wasn't on my sheet. No label. No entry. A single garment hung there, a uniform. Museum staff issue, down to the patch on the sleeve and the small silver name tag. Same color, same fabric, same cut as the one I was wearing. The only difference was the size. It looked slightly smaller, as if made for a thinner version of me. For a long time, I just stared at it. The tag was blank, but someone had pinned a small slip of paper to the collar. The handwriting was thin, careful, property of the night custodian. I don't know why that phrase unsettled me. Maybe because there was no such position. Not anymore. The museum had phased out that title years before I started. Or maybe because the phrase felt too deliberate, too ceremonial, as if night custodian were less a job and more a role someone had to inhabit. I checked the fabric. It was clean, freshly pressed. The scent of starch clung to it faintly, mixed with something else, the dry, metallic smell of objects stored too long without air. There was no dust on the hanger. Someone had placed it there recently. I wrote a note in my log, added an asterisk next to the rack number that didn't exist, and moved on. That should have been the end of it. But as I passed through the next row, I caught a flicker of movement in the reflection of a glass display case. Not fast, just the soft sway of fabric, as if something behind me had shifted its weight. I turned. The air was still. The racks stood motionless, their plastic coverings barely stirring. I waited for the hum of the ventilation to return, but the silence was perfect. When I looked back, the uniform was gone. The hanger swung once, gently, then stopped. I searched the aisle, checked the surrounding racks, even looked beneath the shelving in case it had fallen. Nothing. The hanger remained, still faintly warm where the fabric had been. I should have reported it immediately, but the thought of writing that report, of trying to explain that something had simply vanished, felt absurd. So I didn't. I told myself I'd imagined it, that fatigue had played a trick on me. When I returned to my office an hour later, the uniform was there, folded neatly over the back of my chair, the same tag pinned to the collar, property of the night custodian. For a long while I just stood in the doorway, the hum of the fluorescent light loud in my ears. My first thought was that someone was playing a joke, one of the day staff maybe, testing whether I'd notice. But no one else had access to the building after midnight, not without a key card, and the log showed no entries since my shift began. The uniform looked expectant. The way it hung on the chair, the way the sleeves draped over the armrests, it gave the impression of waiting. The air around it felt slightly denser, warmer, like the faint aura that lingers in a room after someone leaves. I told myself I was overreacting. I picked it up, folded it properly, and set it on the filing cabinet. I left the light on and closed the office door behind me, pretending I was done with it. But every time I passed that corridor again, I saw the faint reflection of fabric in the corner of my eye, the dull gray blue of the museum's uniform, always in motion, always just beyond where I was looking. By 3 a.m, the air in the storage hall had grown noticeably colder. My breath fogged when I exhaled. The clock on the wall had stopped ticking entirely. I walked back toward my office to check the thermostat. The door was open. The chair was empty. The uniform was gone again. I took one step inside and froze. On my desk, beside my open logbook, lay my own name tag, the one I'd been wearing when my shift began. The pin was bent, as though it had been pulled free with force. And there, in the faint reflection of the glass window, stood a figure just behind me, tall, thin, wearing a uniform one size too small. I didn't move at first. I stood there staring at the window, at that faint reflection that shouldn't have existed. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, the sound thin and metallic, its rhythm collapsing into a low hum that made the air feel heavier than it should. I told myself that the figure behind me, the one wearing my uniform, only tighter, smaller, slightly crooked at the seams, was nothing more than an optical illusion. The kind of thing you start to see when you spend too many nights alone, surrounded by shelves of quiet things. But the reflection didn't fade. It stayed, motionless, its head tilted slightly to one side as if observing me with mild curiosity. The moment stretched, endless, until a gust of air whispered through the hallway outside, making the papers on my desk flutter. I turned. The office was empty. The light over my head flickered once, twice, then steadied. The air smelled faintly of dust and iron. When I turned back to the glass, the reflection was gone. Only my own pale face, stared back tired eyes, hollow cheeks. The look of a man who'd forgotten when he last slept properly. I exhaled and tried to laugh, but it came out wrong, too thin, too quiet. I sat at my desk, tried to write something in the logbook, something to make the world orderly again. The words refused to stay straight on the page. The pen dragged, the ink bleeding slightly at the edges of each letter. When I looked up again, my name tag was still sitting there beside the open book, its pin bent back like a broken limb. I reached to pick it up, and the metal burned my fingertips. Not enough to hurt, just enough to feel alive. That was the night I started using the cameras. Technically, I wasn't supposed to. The security feeds were handled by another department, but I had access to one monitor in the storage office, a small square display that cycled through the building's cameras every 10 seconds. I'd never had reason to use it before. There was rarely anything to see. But that night, when the air began to feel wrong again, I switched it on. The screen flickered, then filled with the familiar grainy gray of infrared light. Rows of shelves, plastic coverings that shimmered faintly in the glow, empty corridors, their walls stretching longer than they should have. Everything looked normal, until the feed changed. The next frame showed Section D, the textile aisle, and there I was, standing at the far end. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. I was here, in my office, staring at the monitor, but the figure on the screen was unmistakably me. Same uniform, same stance. The posture was wrong, though. My shoulders were straighter, my head tilted in that same slight, unnatural angle I'd seen in the reflection. The figure on the screen turned slowly, as if aware of being watched. For one breathless instant, I thought it was looking directly into the camera. But no, the angle of the head shifted a fraction lower, and I realized it was looking at something off frame, something I couldn't see. The feed cut out. When it returned, the aisle was empty again. I rewound the footage 3 times. Every time, the same pattern, 10 seconds of nothing, then a flicker, then me, but not me standing at the end of the row. Each time, the same movement, the same tilt of the head, the same slow turn. I checked the timestamp, 3:17 a.m. I looked at the clock on my wall, 3:17 a.m. For a long while, I didn't move. I just listened to the hum of the lights, to the quiet breathing of the building. The air felt thick, as though filled with invisible dust. Somewhere deep in the storage room, a piece of plastic shifted, brushing against fabric. When I finally stood, my chair creaked like a voice trying to form a word. The corridors of the storage building felt different after that, narrower, longer, the air colder with every turn. The walls seemed to absorb the sound of my footsteps instead of returning them. The emergency lights along the ceiling flickered in slow sequence, one after another, like the pulse of something half asleep. In Section D, the rack where the uniform had first appeared was empty again. The hanger swayed gently, though there was no draft. I could see my reflection in its curved metal frame, distorted, stretched a shimmer of movement that didn't quite match my own. I walked slowly down the aisle, scanning each shelf, each wrapped garment, each plastic shroud that reflected the overhead lights. They all looked the same, identical forms of silence and stillness. But as I reached the end of the row, I noticed something folded neatly on one of the lower racks. A shirt. Mine. The fabric bore the faint creases of recent wear, the smell of detergent still clinging to it. My initials were stitched into the label, just above the pocket. And yet, when I checked myself, I was still wearing mine. I held the duplicate in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the strange warmth of fabric that hadn't been touched by another person. The seams were slightly off, uneven, almost hand-stitched. The thread used for the initials was darker, fresher, as if it had only just been sewn. Behind me, something creaked, a single, deliberate sound, the shift of weight on an old floorboard. I turned, heart pounding. The aisle was empty, but at the far end, where the shadows deepened, a figure stood just beyond the reach of the light, tall still, its shape familiar. The faint gleam of a name tag caught the glow mine. I took a step forward. The figure did not move. Then, as the lights flickered once, it stepped back into the dark, soundless, as though it had been absorbed by the air itself. When I reached the spot, there was nothing, only the faint smell of fabric and starch, and a slip of paper lying on the floor. I bent to pick it up. The handwriting was the same as before, thin and deliberate. If the uniform is not worn, it will find the one who fits. I didn't sleep the next day. I went home, drew the curtains, sat in the half-dark with the television on mute. The flicker of images felt safer than silence. When I closed my eyes, I saw the monitor again, the static of the feed, the figure turning its head in that impossible rhythm. By nightfall, I was back at the museum, Habit, maybe. Or something else, a sense of duty that didn't belong entirely to me anymore. The uniform was waiting on the chair when I walked in, folded perfectly. The tag pinned neatly to the collar. The nameplate repaired. I looked at it for a long time. The hum of the lights had deepened into a tone that felt almost harmonic. The air smelled faintly of iron and starch and something else. Something like skin. I sat down, reached out, touched the fabric. It was warm. There's a peculiar kind of silence that only exists in storage rooms at night. The kind that feels layered, as if every object, every folded piece of history, contributes its own measure of stillness to the air. When you've worked here long enough, you begin to sense it like a weight pressing behind your ribs. It isn't an emptiness. It's a tension. A million quiet things watching back. The night after I touched the uniform, the silence felt heavier than it ever had. I came in later than usual, half hoping someone would already be there, a janitor, a security guard, anyone to break the spell, but the building was dark. The keycard clicked, the lights hummed awake in slow succession, and I was alone again with the shelves. In the office, the uniform waited. Not folded this time, but hanging neatly on a hook beside the door, as though I had left it there myself. The paper tag still fluttered faintly from the collar, caught by the draft of the air vent. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I would file a report in the morning, that this was some bureaucratic mistake, an old inventory misplaced. But even as I thought it, I felt that subtle shift in the air again, that awareness, that silent intelligence that seemed to inhabit the walls. I turned on the security monitor. The screen cycled through its cameras, one by one pale, flickering corridors, endless rows of boxes and mannequins wrapped in polyethylene. Each frame bathed in that strange, sterile glow. Then it stopped cycling. The image froze on Section D. At first, I thought the feed had glitched, but the small clock in the corner kept counting seconds. I leaned closer. At the far end of the aisle stood a man in uniform. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the camera, the fabric of his shirt catching the faint shimmer of dust in the air. I recognized the way his shoulders slumped, the angle of his head. It was my stance, precise down to the smallest habit of posture I'd never noticed before. I reached instinctively for the radio, then stopped. There was no one to call. The man on the screen raised a hand slowly, deliberately, and adjusted his name tag. The movement was so small, it might have been a trick of the grainy feed, but the gesture was unmistakably mine. Then, without warning, the image cut to static. When it cleared, the aisle was empty. The clock read 2:46. My heart was racing, but the air in the office remained still. The uniform beside me hadn't moved, yet the smell of starch and old fabric seemed stronger now, almost suffocating. I switched off the monitor and went back into the corridor, needing to move, to hear my footsteps, to prove to myself that the building was still made of walls and not dreams. As I passed through Section C, I began to hear something new, a faint scrape, rhythmic, like the brush of fabric against metal. I followed the sound, every step echoing in the hollow space between shelves. The temperature dropped with each row. When I reached Section D, I stopped. The uniform rack stood in perfect order. Plastic sheets hung motionless in the dim light, but the sound continued, soft and patient, coming from deeper in the aisle. "Hello?" I said. My voice sounded wrong, too loud, too human. The scrape stopped, and then, quietly, it started again, but closer. I saw the movement first in the reflection, the faint ripple of something tall and narrow, shifting between rows. Then, I saw it directly, a man stepping out from behind a rack, his face hidden by shadow. His uniform fit too tightly across the shoulders, the sleeves an inch too short, the collar strained at the neck. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost mechanical, as if each motion were being remembered rather than performed. He didn't look at me. He walked to the nearest rack and began adjusting the garments there, straightening, aligning, ensuring every hanger was equidistant. The gesture was practiced, familiar. I knew it because it was mine. "Who's there?" I said, though I already knew the answer. The man paused, turned his head slightly. The light caught his face for the first time. It was my own. The features weren't perfect, a little too sharp at the edges, the eyes slightly misaligned, as though copied from memory. But the resemblance was enough to make the air leave my lungs. He looked at me, expression calm, unhurried. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled something out, a folded slip of paper. He pinned it to one of the racks without looking away. When he stepped back, I could read the handwriting. Inventory, complete. Placeholder, established. I took a step forward. The man mirrored me, moving in the same rhythm. Another step and another until we stood within a few feet of each other, separated only by a strip of light from the overhead lamp. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but the words felt trapped somewhere behind my tongue. He smiled faintly, that tired, polite museum smile I'd seen in my own reflection 1,000 times. Then he turned away and began walking down the aisle, his footsteps perfectly matching mine, echo for echo, until the sound of both of us blurred into one. When I reached the end of the row, he was gone. The air was warm again. The shelves looked untouched. The racks stood still. But when I returned to the office, the uniform on the hook was missing. I checked the camera feeds again. Every aisle was empty. Every corridor still. The clock read 3:22. I replayed the footage from Section D. At 2:46, the figure appeared. At 2:50, it began to walk down the aisle. At 2:51, it stopped at my office door, and then it turned, facing the camera directly. The image glitched once, the brightness flaring. The figure stepped out of frame. When the feed returned, the office was dark. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I turned toward the door, half expecting to see the figure standing there. Nothing. The fluorescent light above me buzzed faintly, swaying in its casing. Then I noticed the logbook on my desk. The last entry was written in my handwriting, neat, measured, but I hadn't written it. 3:17 a.m. Shift transferred. I didn't remember leaving the building that night. When I came to, it was morning. Sunlight pushed weakly through the high windows, painting the concrete floor with thin bars of gold. My head rested on my desk. The uniform was back on the hook. Everything looked ordinary again. Almost. When I reached into my pocket for my name tag, I found two. One bent, one new. Both engraved with my name. I sat there for a long time, turning them over in my hand, feeling the slight difference in weight. One was warmer than the other. From the hallway, I heard a sound. The slow creak of footsteps pacing the rows, the steady rhythm of someone on duty. It was a comforting sound, familiar. I almost didn't notice that the sound stopped the moment I started to walk. I came in early the next night, though I don't remember deciding to. The sun hadn't completely set when I unlocked the main door, and for a brief moment I could still hear the sound of traffic outside the world of movement and purpose, and people who had no idea that time could slow this way. But the moment the latch clicked, that sound ended, swallowed whole by the building's quiet. The familiar hum of the lights replaced it, low and steady, a mechanical pulse that felt almost alive. Everything looked normal. Section D was in order. The rack stood straight, the plastic covers untouched. The smell of starch and iron still hung faintly in the air, but by now it had become part of the place, as natural as the dust. On my desk, a new shift log waited, the previous night's pages missing. The handwriting on the first line was mine. Shift acknowledged. Night custodian. The words made my stomach tighten. I didn't remember writing them, but the pen still lay on top of the paper, its tip dark with fresh ink. I thought about tearing the page out, but instead I signed my initials next to it, almost without meaning to. The moment the ink touched the paper, the hum in the ceiling deepened, as though the building were exhaling in satisfaction. I told myself it was the sound of the ventilation system coming on. I spent the first hour walking the aisles. Every step echoed the way it always did, but there was a strange rhythm underneath the sound, a faint, secondary footfall that trailed half a beat behind my own. I stopped often, waiting for the echo to catch up, but it never did. It was never more than half a second late, never early, never gone for long. When I passed the row of mirrors used for display calibration, I caught sight of myself again. I was too far away for detail, but the reflection seemed wrong. My posture had changed. My left shoulder, the one I'd injured years ago, didn't slope anymore. It stood straight, and the face that looked back didn't blink when I did. I kept walking. By midnight, I'd convinced myself it was exhaustion. I made coffee, strong and bitter, and sat by the monitor to watch the cameras. I told myself I wouldn't look at Section D again, that I'd stick to the storage bays or the loading dock anywhere but that aisle. But the feed cycled, and habit won. Section D appeared. Empty. Quiet. The camera's angle caught the far wall, the rows of plastic sheeting, the dull gleam of steel. For 5 minutes, nothing changed. Then a shadow moved across the floor. Slow, deliberate, pausing every few feet as if testing the space. When the figure came into view, my heart stopped. It was me. Or the version that had been standing there before. He was holding a clipboard, my clipboard, and checking the inventory tags one by one as if nothing were wrong. He walked with my limp, carried my pen in his left hand, adjusted his glasses when the light flickered, but his movements were slower, cleaner, almost rehearsed like someone imitating me with perfect memory but no fatigue. I leaned closer to the screen. The camera flickered once, and his head turned, just enough for the faint glow of the monitor to catch his eyes. They looked darker than mine, but calmer, more certain. He smiled slightly the same small, weary smile I used to give the day staff when they asked how the night was going. Then, without looking away, he raised the clipboard and wrote something on the top page. When he lowered it again, I could read the words, all present, all accounted for, and then the camera cut to static. The next morning, I ran into Helen from the day shift, the first person I'd spoken to in weeks. She looked surprised to see me. "I thought you'd already left," she said. "Left?" She frowned. "You signed off half an hour ago. You said you were covering another shift tonight. Did you forget something?" I didn't answer. I just nodded, mumbled something about paperwork, and walked past her. She watched me for a moment, confused, then smiled politely the way people do when they've decided not to ask questions. When I reached my office, the air was warmer than it should have been. The light over my desk was already on. The chair was pulled out slightly, as if someone had just stood from it. On the filing cabinet sat a cup of coffee still steaming. My kind of mug. My kind of bitterness in the air. I checked the temperature with my hand. Warm. Recently used. There was no one there. By the second week, it became harder to keep track of when I was actually working. Some nights I'd arrive to find my log already filled out, neat handwriting marking every check and every time. Other nights, the camera showed footage I didn't remember being part of me walking the aisles at hours when I knew I'd been home. Once, I caught a reflection in the glass door of the supply room. My reflection. But I wasn't facing that way. I watched it turn toward me, slowly, the movement smooth and precise, and then the lights in the hall flickered out for half a second. When they came back on, the reflection was gone. After that, the other staff started to notice. Not the night crew. There wasn't one anymore, but the few people who came in during the day. They stopped looking at me the same way. Some hesitated before saying hello. Others smiled too quickly, as if trying to cover uncertainty. One morning, Helen caught me in the corridor. "You've been here a lot lately," she said carefully. "Do they have you on double shifts?" I shook my head. "Just the usual nights." She frowned. "No, I mean during the day. I saw you in the archive room yesterday. You said you were waiting for the humidity logs." I must have looked blank, because her smile faltered. "You really don't remember?" I didn't answer. She laughed awkwardly, backing away. "Long hours, huh?" When she turned, I caught the reflection of us both in the glass wall of the office behind her. But the version of me in the reflection wasn't talking to her. It was watching me. Its mouth moved, slow and deliberate, forming words that made no sound. "You're doing well. Don't stop now." I blinked, and it was gone. That night, when I logged in, the system greeted me with a message I hadn't seen before. "Welcome, custodian number 02. My ID number had always been 471B. I stared at the new designation for a long time before typing it into the report field. The words appeared automatically, without my input. Primary shift, active. Secondary shift, on standby. The screen froze. Then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw movement, someone stepping into the frame behind me. He looked calm, focused. He reached for the uniform on the hook, buttoned it carefully, and turned toward the door. He didn't look back. I reached out and touched the glass, half expecting it to be cold, but it was warm to the touch, like skin. The reflection smiled faintly, nodded once, and walked out of view. In the silence that followed, I heard the distant click of the front latch, the sound of footsteps moving away down the hall. My footsteps, my rhythm, my life, continuing without me. When I left the building that morning, the sunrise looked unfamiliar. The air felt thinner, the color slightly wrong. I caught my reflection in a passing window and saw that my name tag was gone. My chest was bare, the outline of the pin still pressed into the fabric. I told myself I'd left it behind, that I'd find it tomorrow. But deep down, I knew exactly where it was pinned neatly to the collar of a uniform that fit someone else just a little better than it fit me. I have stopped checking the clocks. They still tick, a dry, patient sound that fills the space between my thoughts, but I no longer believe in the hours they measure. Morning and night bleed into one another here. There is only the light from the ceiling fixtures, white and endless, humming softly above the aisles. The hum is the heartbeat of the place, and I have learned to move in rhythm with it. The reports continue to write themselves. Every night I find them waiting on my desk, sheets of crisp paper covered in my handwriting, lines of tidy notation detailing tasks I do not remember performing. The entries are precise, even bureaucratic. 110, Section C inspected. 245, textile inventory verified. 3, replacement confirmed. Sometimes the handwriting falters for a line or two, as if written by a hand that remembers the shape of each letter, but has forgotten their meaning. When I try to correct the mistakes, the ink spreads like oil and blurs the words beyond reading. I've stopped trying. I've also stopped turning on the cameras. They come on by themselves now. The small monitor glows faintly at the edge of my vision, and I can feel when it wants me to look. Most nights I resist, but inevitably I give in. The screen hums awake, and the image is always the same. Section D, the aisle with the uniforms, where the plastic sheets hang like pale skins in the recycled air. There are 2 of us now. The other moves with a steadiness I can't imitate anymore. His posture is perfect, his steps measured, his attention absolute. I watch him work sorting, counting, adjusting the hangers until they are precisely equidistant. He never hurries, never falters. He never looks toward the camera, except when he does. When that happens, the feed always flickers. Just once, a pulse of static like a breath drawn in surprise. Then his face turns toward the lens, and I can see the difference between us clearly. The lack of fatigue, the calm certainty in his eyes, the way the corners of his mouth lift into that careful, neutral expression we're trained to wear when speaking to donors. It doesn't blink. I've tried to tell myself he's only an echo, a recording that loops each night, but then the background changes. The boxes shift. A ladder that was leaning left in one frame leans right in the next. And sometimes, on mornings when I return from the outer corridor, I find evidence of his passage. A fresh coffee cup in the bin, the faint impression of shoes on the dust by the loading bay, a pen left, uncapped on the logbook. It's not the duplication that frightens me. It's the fact that he's better at the job than I ever was. The reports he writes are immaculate. His handwriting is steadied. His logs are longer, more detailed. He's begun cataloging items I've never seen, objects that don't appear on the museum's register entries labeled only as acquisition, unrecorded, or specimen, transferred. I've checked every database, every archive. They don't exist. Yet when I walk the aisles, I can feel their presence, filling spaces that used to be empty. When I asked Helen about it the last time I saw her, 2 mornings ago, or maybe 3, she looked confused. "You're still doing nights?" she asked. "Yes. I thought they moved you to the day team. You've been signing the reports all week." I told her that wasn't possible, that she must have mistaken someone else for me. She hesitated, then smiled with that uneasy politeness that people use when they decide a conversation is over. "Well," she said, "whoever it is, he looks rested. You should take some time off." When she turned away, I saw the reflection in the glass door behind her. The other me neat, composed, watching with that same mild expression. He nodded once, as if approving. After that, no one else spoke to me. It's difficult to say when I stopped leaving the building. The outside world feels like something I used to dream. The smell of coffee, the hiss of buses, the pale light of morning over the river. All of it feels too sharp, too fast, as if belonging to a rhythm my body no longer knows how to keep. Here, everything moves slower, in measures of dust and breath. I still walk the aisles. It's a habit I can't abandon. The air grows colder the deeper I go, until my breath fogs faintly under the lights. The shelves tower on both sides, endless rows of catalog stillness. I sometimes imagine the objects whispering to one another when I'm not looking, small papery voices trading stories about who used to care for them. Lately, though, I've begun to hear something else. Footsteps, not echoes, not tricks of the air. Footsteps that keep pace with mine, that stop when I stop. Sometimes I catch glimpses of him between the racks, the other custodian. His movement slower now, as if he's allowing me to catch up. When I call out, the sound falls flat. He tilts his head in acknowledgement, like a teacher pleased with a student's progress, then steps back into shadow. The first time I tried to approach him, the lights flickered. When they came back, I was standing where he had been, and the space I had just occupied was empty. That's when I began to understand. The word placeholder had never meant substitute. It meant station, position, a point on a map that must always be occupied. The work requires presence, even when no one is looking. Especially then, there can never be an unguarded aisle. Never an unrecorded moment. Never an unfilled role. Last night I woke at my desk. I don't remember falling asleep. The office smelled faintly of starch and ozone. The monitor was on again, though I hadn't touched it. The image showed the far end of Section D. The other me stood before the last rack, pinning a sheet of paper to the wall. He stepped aside so the camera could see it clearly. Placeholder secured. Then he turned and looked into the camera, directly this time. The smile was small, almost apologetic. He raised a hand, my hand, and gestured for me to come closer. The screen flickered once. When it cleared, the aisle was empty, but I could still hear the sound of his footsteps, moving away, slow and even, until they merged with the hum of the building. I think he's finished his shift now. The uniform on the hook fits perfectly when I try it on. The air around it smells clean, like paper and iron. The name tag has been polished. The letters gleam softly under the light. I've started filling out the reports again. My handwriting has steadied. Sometimes, when the cameras flicker, I catch sight of someone sitting at my desk, tired, older, watching the screens with a hollow kind of patience. I imagine he's the one who came before me. I imagine he's glad the post is filled. When I stand to make my rounds, the building exhales. The hum deepens. Satisfied. There's comfort in that, I think, in knowing that the work continues, that the silence remains tended. I am the night custodian now. The others before me were only placeholders. And someday, when the next one arrives, I will be too. Story 5. The Silent Town. I was 3 hours into the drive when I realized I hadn't heard a single thing. No engine, no radio, no tires on asphalt, just the faint vibration of motion, like traveling through a film with the sound turned off. I thought it was the wind at first, or fatigue. The highway stretched ahead, long and colorless. A pale ribbon of road cutting through fields that had forgotten to grow anything. The horizon looked like paper rubbed thin, the kind of white that eats the sky. I'd left Omaha before dawn, heading west without much reason, maybe because I needed the quiet. My apartment had grown too full of other people's noise, neighbors arguing, the elevator clanging, a clock that ticked too loudly in an empty room. I told myself I'd just drive until it felt different. But silence, I was learning, has a way of finding you, no matter how far you go. The first town wasn't on any map. A faded sign on the roadside announced it simply. Stillfield population, 612. The numbers had peeled away, leaving only the shadows of paint. I almost didn't notice the turnoff until I'd passed it. Something made me brake, though curiosity. Maybe that and the fact that my phone had lost signal 20 miles back. The road into Stillfield was narrow, the kind of road that hadn't been repaved in decades. The surface glimmered faintly with old tar, the edges crumbling into yellow weeds. My headlights picked up fragments of white paint old lane markers that no longer led anywhere. I rolled the window down. The air was cool, dry, almost antiseptic. No birds, no insects. Just the steady hum of my own breathing. When the town appeared, it was sudden, a cluster of low buildings. Brick and concrete huddled close as if to keep each other company. A diner, a service station, a post office with its blinds half drawn. Everything perfectly ordinary, perfectly still. I parked in front of the diner, killed the engine, and sat for a moment. The silence pressed against the car like a weight. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of expectation. The world here didn't seem to be waiting for anything. The sign above the door read "Eat," in faded red letters that flickered weakly, even though there was no power line in sight. When I pushed the door open, a bell should have rung. It didn't. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old grease. The lights were on, pale and humming, but the hum didn't reach my ears. At the counter, a man in an apron was refilling a coffee pot. He looked up, smiled mechanically, and gestured toward a booth near the window. I nodded, sat down, waited for him to speak. He didn't. He placed a menu in front of me. The paper was blank. I looked up, trying to decide if this was some kind of joke, but the man only tilted his head, patient, expectant. When I opened my mouth to ask for coffee, he shook his head and pressed a finger gently to his lips. I hesitated, smiled awkwardly, mimicked the gesture. He nodded, pleased, and walked away. Through the window, I could see the main street. A gas station, a grocery, a row of parked cars coated in the same pale dust. People moved between them, slow, deliberate shapes, their faces expressionless, their movements almost choreographed. No voices. Not even the scrape of shoes on pavement. It was like watching actors rehearsing a scene in which sound hadn't yet been added. I told myself it had to be something simple, a small town tradition maybe, a local rule. Respect the quiet. I'd seen stranger things in the Midwest, but when I tried to turn on my phone again, the screen stayed black. Even the digital clock on the diner's wall had stopped at 11:37. The man returned with a cup of coffee, steaming faintly. He set it down and pointed to the sugar jar. I thanked him automatically, out loud. The cup trembled. He froze, his hand still hovering over the table, eyes widening just slightly. Everyone in the diner turned toward me, every head, every movement stopping mid-gesture. The silence changed texture, thickened, like water freezing. I whispered, "I'm sorry," but no sound came out. The words dissolved in the air. The man lowered his hand, slowly, deliberately, as if performing an action with consequences he already understood. He pointed toward the wall beside the counter. A sign was taped there, handwritten in careful block letters. "Respect the quiet." Beneath it, smaller words. "It listens." I didn't finish the coffee. I left a few dollars on the table out of habit, though I doubted anyone would take them, and walked out. The bell above the door remained silent as it swung shut behind me. Outside, the street had emptied. The air was perfectly still. A dog lay in the shade of a truck, unmoving. Farther down the road, the traffic light flickered between red and green, though no cars passed. When I started the engine, the sound came back briefly, harshly, like the world gasping awake. Then it cut out again. The wheel vibrated under my hands, but the motor made no noise. I pressed the accelerator. The car moved, silent as a thought. As I passed the edge of town, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man from the diner was standing in the middle of the street. apron fluttering in the wind I couldn't hear. He raised one hand, palm up, and mouthed something slow, careful syllables. It looked like a warning, or a goodbye. The sign at the end of the road flickered as I drove past. For a moment, it read Still Field Population, 613. I drove until the road disappeared. Not literally, the pavement still stretched on, flat and silver in the sun, but the further I went, the less it seemed to exist as something real. The edges blurred, the center lines faded, and the horizon pulled itself farther away, always just beyond reach. My car rolled through the silence like a ghost imitating motion, the steering wheel humming faintly under my palms. The only proof that machinery still obeyed me. For the first hour, I told myself I was fine. I'd left Stillfield behind. The air outside the window was clean, dry, faintly metallic, the smell of highway and heat. But somewhere around the point where the fields turned to scrubland, I realized something had changed. The silence had a pattern now. It breathed. It wasn't an absence anymore. It was a rhythm, a slow inhale, a long exhale, like wind that didn't move air, only memory. I reached for the radio. The knob felt cold. I hadn't touched it since leaving Omaha, when static had been the only thing alive between stations. I turned it anyway, half hoping for music or news or anything human. For a moment, nothing. Then faintly, a sound, not static, not quite. It was too slow, too deliberate, like a whisper caught in the machinery. The needle drifted until it settled on a frequency that wasn't marked. 91.6. A low hum filled the car, soft and irregular. Then, under it, a voice distant, female, barely more than breath. You can hear this, don't speak. Please. Not yet. The voice cracked, splintered by interference, but the words were clear. You left. That's good. Don't look back. Don't answer them. Keep driving until the sound finds you again. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My throat went dry. Who are you? I asked, but my own voice didn't sound right. It came out muffled, dulled, like I was speaking underwater. The voice on the radio paused. Then, softly, they'll hear you if you talk. It listens through the air now. Something in the background shifted, a faint scraping, like wind dragging across metal. Then, the voice again, lower, closer. If you saw them move, you've already been marked. The static grew louder, swallowing her words. I tried to adjust the dial, but the knob resisted. The signal pulsed once, twice, and then the hum returned, steady, endless. The screen of the radio flickered between numbers 91.6, 9.16, 0.916 before going dark. I drove in silence for another hour. The road curved north without warning. The landscape changed too. The fields gave way to dry hills scattered with telephone poles. The wires overhead sagged low, heavy, like veins in a sleeping body. Every few miles, one of the poles leaned slightly, its shadow stretching across the road like a barrier. I kept my eyes forward. Every so often, I caught the faintest impression of motion in the mirror. Not shapes, exactly, but interruptions in light, like something walking in sync with the car's reflection. When I stopped at the next rest area, it wasn't on any map. The building looked new, its concrete still pale, its roof sharp against the sky. A single vending machine stood outside, humming faintly, but without sound. Its display glowed 0. Inside, the restroom lights flickered weakly. The mirror above the sink was clean, but the reflection behind me wasn't the same as the room. In the glass, the corridor outside stretched longer, deeper, lined with closed doors that didn't exist in the real hallway. I turned around. Nothing. Just the exit sign, flickering faintly green. When I looked back, there was someone in the reflection, a woman standing behind me, hair hanging loosely over her face, wearing a pale coat. Her hands were folded neatly, in front of her, as if waiting. I spun around again. The space was empty. When I looked into the mirror once more, she was closer. Her mouth moved. I couldn't hear what she said, but I felt the words inside my chest the way you feel thunder before it breaks the air. Don't speak. It's still listening. The lights went out. For an instant, everything vanished, the mirror, the walls, even the weight of my own body. Then the emergency bulb kicked in, flooding the room with a dim red glow. The reflection was gone. The air smelled faintly of ozone and dust. On the wall above the sink, written in marker, were 3 words: "Stay on highway." I left the building without washing my hands. Back in the car, I turned the key and waited for the silence to settle again. The radio flickered to life on its own, the dial frozen on 91.6. This time the voice came through clearly, though it sounded different, calmer, slower, as if speaking from very far away. "You saw her, didn't you? The woman in white." I didn't answer. "She isn't one of them. Not yet. She's what's left of someone who tried to leave before you." The quiet took her voice first. That's what it does. Yen. The signal hissed softly. A faint hum rose beneath it, a familiar tone, the same one that filled the diner, the air, the spaces between thought and breath. "Don't let it hear your name," the voice continued. "That's how it finds the rest of you." The static deepened. For a moment, I thought I heard breathing through the speakers. Then, quietly, almost kindly, "If it follows you, it won't be loud. It will sound like nothing at all." The signal cut out. The road ahead stretched straight into the horizon, its surface shimmering with heat. The silence returned thick, soft, absolute. The only sound left was the faint clicking of the turn signal, though it didn't blink anymore. I drove until the sun began to sink, until the landscape turned red and gold. My phone screen glowed briefly, then dimmed again. The clock read 11:37, the same time as the diner. I drove west until the sky bruised itself into night. The horizon had turned to ash, and the road no longer felt like it was leading anywhere. It simply continued. The silence by then had stopped being strange. It had become a kind of gravity, a presence pressed against my ribs, patient, waiting. When I tried to remember the last real sound I'd heard, I couldn't. The hum of the car was gone. Even the faint rasp of my breath seemed to dissolve before reaching my ears. What remained was vibration, the whisper of motion through my bones. The voice on the radio hadn't returned. The screen glowed faintly, its numbers frozen. 90, 1.6. Sometimes faintly I thought I could hear breathing through the static, but when I leaned closer it stopped, as if whoever or whatever was on the other end had been listening for my movement. The highway split ahead. One sign pointed north toward Pine Hollow, the other west, its lettering weathered blank. I chose west. The road narrowed, flanked by empty fields where power lines ran like black veins through a colorless sky. The moon had risen by then, pale and thin, its light flat and soundless. Every few miles, an old road marker appeared, each one bearing a single word painted in fading white: "Listen." The first time I saw it, I laughed, quietly. My own voice startled me. It came out brittle, thin, as if the air had forgotten how to carry it. By the third marker, I stopped laughing. Somewhere behind me, a light flickered distant, faint. In the rearview mirror, it looked like the headlights of a car. At first, I was relieved. Proof, finally, that I wasn't alone. But as I watched, the relief twisted into something smaller, sharper. The lights stayed the same distance no matter how fast I drove. They neither gained nor fell away. Always fixed, steady, patient. When I turned off the highway for a rest stop, little more than a cracked parking lot beside an abandoned gas station, the lights followed. I cut the engine. The silence deepened, thick as velvet. The other car stopped too. For a moment, we sat like that, two unmoving shadows under a sky that no longer bothered with stars. I waited for the sound of a door, an engine cooling, something human. Nothing. The light stayed on. I stepped out. The air was cold enough to sting. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes, or at least I thought it should have. I couldn't hear it. The other car was an old sedan, dark, its windows reflecting nothing. I walked closer, keeping my eyes on the glow of its headlights. The glass was too clean. The world inside looked warped, stretched. When I was close enough to touch it, I stopped. My breath fogged against the windshield, and for a moment I saw nothing but my own reflection. Pale face, tired eyes, the smear of light across the glass. Then, slowly, another reflection slid into view beside mine. A woman, older, hair gray-white, falling round her shoulders like smoke. Her eyes were open too wide, her mouth a thin, careful line. She stood just behind me, though the space around me was empty. I turned. Quickly, there was no one there. When I looked back, she was closer, standing inside the car now, visible through the glass, one hand resting gently on the steering wheel. Her lips moved. No sound. The headlights flickered once, twice, then dimmed. I took a step back. The silence around me thickened until I could feel it pressing against my skin. I could taste metal on my tongue. The woman's expression didn't change. She raised one hand, slow and deliberate, and pointed toward my chest, not at me, but through me, as though marking something I couldn't see. The radio in my car came on by itself, the same frequency, 就是一点6. Her voice, faint, cracked with distance. Don't stop again. The lights went out. For a moment, the world vanished. No car, no ground, just the weight of silence crushing everything into stillness. Then, like breath returning, my own headlights flared to life. The other car was gone. The air smelled faintly of ozone and burnt plastic. I got back in and drove. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time in that place moved differently. The landscape repeated itself in strange loops. The same patch of grass, the same mile marker, the same shadow of a tree that shouldn't have been there. My reflection in the windshield looked wrong. The angle of my mouth slightly delayed. The blink of my eyes slower than it should be. At some point, the road curved, leading me down a gentle slope toward a valley. There, scattered across the plain, I saw lights. Dozens of them warm, golden, almost inviting. A town, Stillfield. It shouldn't have been possible. I had driven straight west for hours, but there it was. The diner, the gas station, the empty street bathed in the same weak neon. The sign, at the edge of town, still flickered. Only now it read, Stillfield population, 614. I stopped at the intersection. The streetlight above me turned from green to red and back again, though no other cars passed. The air through the open window felt thick, warm, almost alive. Then, faintly, beneath the silence I heard something. Not a voice, not music, a pulse, a single, slow heartbeat, and with it, a whisper threading through the static of the car radio. It followed you home. In the mirror, the headlights of the black sedan blinked back into existence, closer this time. The woman was sitting behind the wheel, smiling, her mouth opened. No sound. But my ears began to ring, sharp and deep, like pressure building underwater. I clutched the wheel, gasping, though I couldn't hear my own breath. The lights on the street began to dim one by one, the town folding into darkness. In the mirror, she lifted one finger to her lips. Silence. The world obeyed. The moment I crossed the faded welcome sign, the world lost its weight again. No wind, no hum of the tires, no sensation of speed, only a kind of suspension, as though the car were gliding through air too thick to be real. The headlights washed over the street, lighting buildings I already knew by shape, by color, by the wrongness of their stillness. Stillfield population, 614. It should have meant something, that number, but it hung in my mind like an unanswered question, repeating itself in rhythm with my pulse. I stopped at the diner first. The eat sign still flickered, the red bulb struggling to burn through a film of dust. Through the glass, I could see shapes sitting in the booths, the same people as before, or new ones who had taken their place. It didn't matter. Their faces were pale, eyes open, hands folded neatly on the table. They weren't moving. When I stepped out of the car, the soundless air thick and warm, heavy, almost viscous. My heartbeat echoed in my skull like something foreign. The door to the diner creaked when I pushed it open, but the sound never reached my ears. Inside, the light was too bright. The man behind the counter stood in the exact same place, apron uncreased, coffee pot half full. He looked up as I entered. His lips curved into that same mechanical smile. Then, without breaking eye contact, he pointed again to the sign above the counter, "Respect the quiet," and beneath it, new words had been added. "She's learning." I felt something shift in the air like a breath drawn close to the skin. Everyone in the diner turned their heads toward me in unison, the motion smooth and deliberate, the movement of people who no longer needed muscles to move. For the first time, I noticed the details. Their eyes weren't empty. They shimmered faintly, like glass reflecting light that wasn't in the room. The same glow the headlights of the black car had made. I backed away. The man's hand twitched, as though reaching for me, but his fingers stopped midair, frozen in the act of hesitation. Outside, the street was lined with more of them, silent, patient, facing my car. Their clothes were clean, their faces calm. The stillness wasn't death, it was rehearsal. They were waiting. I turned to run. The door didn't move. My reflection in the glass stared back at me, half a second delayed, like it was deciding whether to follow. When it finally did, the delay felt longer than time itself. The street outside looked different now. The buildings leaned inward, their walls breathing faintly with the pulse that came from somewhere deep beneath the ground. Streetlights flickered with slow precision, a Morse code I couldn't understand. The silence had texture now, like cloth being pulled over my head. When I looked down, the pavement rippled slightly under my feet, as though it wasn't solid anymore. My reflection stretched along its surface, thinner, taller, more deliberate in its movements. It smiled when I didn't. I turned away, but the reflection stayed where it was, watching. That's when I noticed the black sedan parked at the edge of town. Its headlights were off, but I could still see the faint shimmer of the woman's outline behind the wheel. She wasn't looking at me this time. She was looking at the people, the silent rows of them that now filled the street, shoulder to shoulder, their faces all turned toward me. And then, as one, they lifted their hands and pointed to the sky. Above us, something moved, not clouds, not wind. The air folded. The stars seemed to shift positions, rearranging themselves into patterns that looked almost like words. For a second, the silence broke, not with noise, but with a feeling, a deep vibration that pressed through my chest, through bone and breath, a soundless roar of thought. It spoke without language. It said, "Stay." The crowd lowered their hands. The diner door swung open behind me. Inside, the man in the apron was still pointing at the sign. "She's learning." I took a step back. The black sedan's headlights flickered on, weak at first, then brighter. The woman inside raised her hand to her lips again, but this time she didn't signal silence. She pointed to the passenger seat beside her, then at me. I didn't move. The crowd began to hum. Not sound, not real vibration, but something beneath the skin, an ache that pulsed in my teeth and spine. My reflection in the window tilted its head, mimicking the motion of the crowd. When I blinked, the reflection didn't. It smiled wider. The streetlight above me turned white. Then everything froze. For an instant, the world looked painted, motionless, colorless, an imitation of itself. The only thing that moved was the reflection in the diner window, walking toward me, its mouth opening in slow, deliberate rhythm. The words reached me not as sound, but as pressure behind my eyes. "You brought it with you." The lights in the diner went out. I turned and ran. The air offered resistance, thick and syrupy, pulling at my limbs. The car door opened as I reached it, though I hadn't touched the handle. Inside, the radio was already on. "To read Erlo." The voice came through at once, calm and almost tender. "You've gone too far, haven't you?" I gripped the steering wheel, my fingers slick with sweat. "They needed a voice," it said. "You spoke. Now it has one." In the rearview mirror, the woman in white sat in the back seat, watching me with the faintest smile. Her lips moved once more, forming a word I couldn't hear, or maybe didn't need to. The streetlights blinked out one by one, moving away from town, following the road I had come from. I turned the key. The car moved, silent as breath. Behind me, the sign at the edge of town flickered again. Stillfield population, 615. I don't remember leaving Stillfield this time. I only remember the way the silence followed, how it folded itself around me like fabric, how it began to breathe when I did. The highway stretched ahead, endless, a ribbon of asphalt, without color or distance. The stars above had lost their flicker, hanging motionless in a sky that no longer bothered pretending to move. The car drove itself, or maybe I drove without thinking. The difference didn't matter. I kept my eyes forward, though I could feel her sitting behind me, the woman in white, silent, calm, the faint reflection of her face in the windshield when the road bent. I didn't dare turn around. Every so often I thought I saw her lips moving, but I knew better now. Words had consequences here. The radio stayed on, 91.6. The display no longer glowed. It pulsed, faintly, in rhythm with my heartbeat. For a long time the speakers gave nothing but the sound of breath. Not mine, not hers. Something in between. Then, gently, the voice began again. "You can stop driving now." It was my voice. Tired, quiet, a little hoarse the way I sounded after too many nights alone. "You've done what it wanted," the voice said. "You gave it language. It can speak again." I shook my head. "No," I whispered. "That's not me." But the sound of my words didn't come from my mouth. It came from the radio. A half second later, looping, rearranging itself. "Not me," it repeated softly. "Not me." The headlights began to dim. The road ahead dissolved into darkness. The hum of the tires fell away until there was only vibration. A low resonance through the frame of the car, the same tone that had filled the diner, the same note that lived under every silence in Stillfield. When I looked down at the dashboard, I realized the key was gone. The engine had never been on. The voice, my voice, spoke again, slower now, like someone reading from an old recording. "You've been driving a long time. The town was only the first place it learned to rest. It needs quiet to grow. It needs a mouth to speak through. It chose yours." I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't help. The voice wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside my head, soft, patient, kind. "Listen," it said. "Do you hear how beautiful it is? The way the silence shapes itself around every thought?" The windshield began to fog from the inside. A handprint appeared in the mist. Not hers, not mine. Something thinner, longer, too graceful to belong to either. The outline of the fingers stayed for a moment, then slid downward, leaving behind streaks that pulsed faintly, like veins lit from within. Behind the fog, I saw movement. A figure walking along the side of the road, barefoot, pale against the dark. As the car rolled closer, I saw her face. It was mine. She turned toward the headlights, eyes open, lips moving in time with the words from the radio. "You've come home," she said. The world tilted. The horizon split into two, one rising, one falling. I slammed the brakes, but the car didn't stop. It glided through her, through me, and for a moment, everything inverted. The inside became the outside. The voice became the silence. I was standing in the road. The car was empty. Its headlights were off. The radio hissed softly from somewhere inside, still whispering my name in that slow, deliberate rhythm. "You left the sound behind. You are the quiet now." I stepped toward it, drawn by the warmth of the glow, by the familiarity of my own voice echoing back at me. When I reached the open door, the static faded. A single, clean tone replaced it high, perfect, like the sound a world might make before it decides to stop turning. The last thing I heard, if hearing is even the right word, was my voice on the airwaves, steady, patient, the way a late-night radio host speaks to no one and everyone at once. This has been Station 90, 1.6, The Quiet Hour. Thank you for listening. Keep your voice low And if you hear someone calling your name from the dark, don't answer. The signal pulsed once, then went silent. The road was empty. The car was gone. The horizon glowed faintly with the color of static. Somewhere, very far away, another radio turned itself on, and my voice began again. Good evening, listeners. Tonight's story is called The Silent Town. And so, dear listener, the night draws its last breath. If you've stayed with me through the long hours, thank you. You've given these stories a listener. You've made the silence pay attention. So before you turn off the light, check the corners of your room. Listen to what the quiet is trying to say. And if something answers from the dark, sounding a little too much like your own voice, don't be afraid. It's only the night finishing its sentence. This is The Quiet Hours. Signing off. Good night, and may the silence be gentle with you.